At Li Prefecture capital, the Broadly River is the kingdom's lifeline, linking trade north to Song and south to the sea. On the first day of spring, the frozen river is officially forced open, and the docks surge with workers whose lives depend on this waterway. Laborers hammer at the ice first, setting up the brutal work that will let the haulers drag the breaker ship through. Then the haulers lean into their shoulder ropes and chant together as they drag the giant ship forward. The special ship is built for one job alone, with an iron bottom and heavy old timber strong enough to smash straight through the ice. Each impact blasts the frozen surface apart, flinging ice shards and white frost into the sunlight like a storm. Opening a river this wide takes all day, so one exhausted team rotates out while the next group grabs the ropes without pause. Among the men leading the line, one figure stands out, Li Chi, a handsome, straight-backed hauler who barely looks like he belongs in this rough crowd. Li Chi watches the ship carve open the frozen river and still finds the sight awe-inspiring, even after seeing it for the third year in a row. Before he can linger, Uncle Lu hooks him in a rough headlock and drags him off to get ready for the next round and some hot soup. At the riverside break area, the men crowd around soup and dry clothes, but Li Chi hangs back instead of fighting for the best bowl. Only after most of the others have eaten does Li Chi take his own bowl and settle back down to watch the second team work. The other haulers treat him with easy respect, bringing him a stool because he helped win their gang the honor of leading the first wave under the prefect's eyes. Sitting there with his soup, Li Chi drifts back into the old thought he can never quite shake: he does not belong to this world. He compares the giant ship to what he knew before and stares at his own body, still amazed that he has become this strong. To test that impossible strength, Li Chi suddenly throws a punch, and the air itself cracks hard enough to blast dust off the ground. The haulers just cheer and praise his wave-breaking punch, while Li Chi quietly marvels because they have no idea how strange this still feels to him. Li Chi's mind flashes back to the plane crash that threw him into this world, where he woke up in his own body with only a damaged backpack and half-broken game console left. When he first arrived with no identity and barely any belongings, Li Chi only survived because local haulers found him and took him in. In the years after that, Uncle Lu taught Li Chi the boat hauler's crude cultivation method, and Li Chi's body grew strong enough to carry 700 or 800 gene with ease. That should have been exciting, but Uncle Lu made one thing clear early: the hauler's method is only the bottom rung in a world where real power belongs to the military, the government, and the sex. Li Chi once thought his modern knowledge would make him special here, but reality crushed that fantasy fast. Even his strength in math means little in a city where the Thousand Mechanisms sect already studies calculation and probability far beyond anything he can follow. Travel is no comfort either, because ordinary people here can already cover impossible distances on foot, and spirit horses go even farther. This world did not replace tools with machines, it replaced them with cultivated human bodies. Li Chi has even seen a craftsman carve a battlefield of 100 warriors onto a single grain of rice just to show off. The moment that truly broke his old common sense was watching a military commander split the entire Li River apart with one swing of a long blade. That display scared Li Chi badly enough to haunt him for 3 nights, and it taught him exactly how small he really was here. Even food upended his old expectations, because this land still farms yet produces spirit rice so rich that he once got sick from eating half a bowl. Now his stronger body can devour several gene at a sitting, but meat is still painfully rare because this world barely raises livestock at all. He once hoped raising animals might be his chance to get ahead, until he learned the wild beasts here are too monstrous to farm safely. So after years of trying, Li Chi has had to admit the truth. Ambition alone cannot carry him upward in a world where cultivation methods are locked behind faction walls. Even among simple boat haulers, the river labor is split into rival gangs that guard their techniques like treasure, and only teach people they can fully control. Anyone who learns a method must swear deadly oaths and sign binding documents, and betrayal can bring brutal punishment from both the gang and the law. Because of that, Li Chi knows he cannot just cross into another faction's path, no matter how badly he wants something better. All he has really won in 3 years is a small strategist role in the wave-breaking gang and the respect of 100 or 2 fellow haulers. He lets out a long sigh, bitterly aware that after transmigrating to another world, he somehow ended up living an even poorer and more ordinary life. Then a drooling child runs up calling for Uncle Li, saying Sixth Master wants to see him, and the interruption snaps Li Chi out of his brooding. Li Chi takes one look at the hungry little guide and wordlessly hands over his own half-finished bowl of meat soup. The child gulps it down without even remembering to thank him, which makes Uncle Lu frown because meat is far too rare to waste on a messenger. Li Chi only answers with a quiet smile, saying that because he once knew hunger, and was once saved by a bowl of soup, he cannot help passing that kindness on. Uncle Lu grumbles that it was only vegetable soup back then, but he did not come over to argue. He came because something is happening and he wants Li Chi's help. When Uncle Lu says they have a problem, Li Chi drops his stray thoughts and focuses on him at once. Uncle Lu points out the odd part. The lead shift usually belonged to the Strong Force gang, so their total absence makes no sense. Li Chi initially brushes it off, saying gangs always compete for the lead shift and the Strong Force gang cannot openly start a war over losing it. Uncle Lu reveals the real danger. Their informants say not a single Strong Force gang member came to watch or wait for scraps today. That makes Li Chi stop cold, because even gangs that miss the main shifts normally send men for replacements and prize scraps. Realizing the entire Strong Force gang must be gathered somewhere for something serious, Li Chi decides to skip the next shift and investigate their side himself. Uncle Lu agrees immediately and reminds Li Chi why he trusts him most. Li Chi is sharp, can fight, and has already become one of the gang's strongest men. After a final warning to stay safe, Uncle Lu sends him off, and Li Chi leaves without wasting another moment. On the city streets, Li Chi notices something useful right away. Everyone is busy preparing for the river opening, and a hauler wandering around draws attention. To test that suspicion, Li Chi casually asks a vendor why people keep staring at him. The vendor bluntly tells him he is the only hauler on this street when every other hauler should be fighting for work at the river. That answer confirms Li Chi's guess. If the Strong Force men are either at the river nor scattered through the city, they must all be hiding together. Since poor haulers cannot afford to skip a payday unless something major is happening, Li Chi concludes this gathering could be a war council and quickens his pace. At a frozen tributary, Li Chi picks the stealthiest route possible. He tests the ice, makes sure no one is watching, and smashes through it himself. Using the wave-breaking force, Li Chi slips underwater and swims beneath the ice like a fish toward the Strong Force gang's territory. He reaches the poor riverside alley controlled by the Strong Force gang, and grows even more careful when he spots fishing holes and lines cut into the ice. Li Chi presses close to the ice to listen, but hears nothing from above where someone should have been watching. To make sure, he catches a fish barehanded and hooks it onto the lines one after another, waiting to see if anyone reacts. Even when the lines jerk and a rod gets dragged into the water, no one comes, proving the outer area is completely unwatched. Running out of breath and numbed by the icy canal, Li Chi finally bursts up through a hole and scrambles onto the bank before his strength gives out. He slips through the deserted alleys, carefully avoiding the tailors allied with the Strong Force gang until he reaches the gang's gathering square unseen. Hiding behind a wall near the square, Li Chi hears a crowd of haulers talking about a ritualist and the promise of learning sorcery. The idea shocks him, because cultivation methods are priceless in this world, so he risks a peek at the center of the meeting. In the middle of the crowd, Li Chi spots the Strong Force gang leader beside a refined young man in cotton clothes. Then Li Chi's blood runs cold when he sees what the young man is holding, half of Li Chi's old game console. A Strong Force brute produces the other half, and Li Chi realizes someone stole the keepsake straight out of his home. That theft rattles Li Chi badly, because the console is useless junk to him but dangerously suspicious if the authorities ever notice it. The young man begins his speech by asking if they know why he came and why he offered rewards and a cultivation art for this strange object. He proudly lectures them on different Dao paths, but the ring of rough haulers only stare back in total confusion. Annoyed that no one understands him, the young man cuts the lecture short and says the console comes from a forbidden separate path called the Outer Dao. He explains that he sensed an Outer Dao disturbance years ago, spent 2.5 years on a major ritual, and finally traced the omen to the Strong Force gang. He admits that is why the gang spent months searching the mountains and missed their river opening chance, all to recover this object for him. From his hiding place, Li Chi is shaken but also relieved, because it sounds like the ritualist found the console, not Li Chi himself. He keeps listening anyway, because whatever technique the young man gives the Strong Force gang could upset the balance between the city's 3 hauler factions. The ritualist says he will not cheat them and raises a hand glowing with purple light as he presents their reward. The instant Li Chi sees that purple light, agony explodes in his head so violently that he collapses out of hiding. But the shockwave hits the whole square, and while the haulers writhe in pain and the ritualist turns away, Li Chi realizes no one has noticed his exposed position yet. Realizing this is his only chance, Li Chi forces his numb body upright and staggers toward the alley exit. Just before he escapes, the Strong Force gang leader locks eyes with him through the pain and roars that someone is there. Panic takes over, and Li Chi bolts through the streets with only one thought left in his shattered mind: run or die. He crashes into pedestrians, takes a heavy punch to the face, and still keeps crawling forward like he cannot feel anything except the need to escape. Half blind with pain, Li Chi drags himself all the way back to the river where the wave-breaking gang is still waiting to move. His fellow haulers spot him in shock, shout for help, and Li Chi collapses the moment he reaches friendly faces. In the darkness after he blacks out, Li Chi sees streams of code and memory-like data flashing through his mind. The data suddenly turns into a wall of red error messages ending in a giant error, and the pain jerks a scream out of him. Li Chi jolts awake drenched in sweat, and the men around him scramble to feed him, while Uncle Lu orders meat broth instead of plain water. Too shaken to hold the bowl himself, Li Chi is fed the hot broth by Uncle Lu until some strength and color finally return. After clearing everyone else out, Uncle Lu helps Li Chi into a small fishing shed and demands to know what could have left him looking this wrecked. Li Chi barely hears him at first, because his attention is grabbed by a crude floating interface hanging beneath the big river boat. The box reads River Opening Ceremony Progress, 46%, and Li Chi realizes he can somehow see actions as progress bars. When he looks at a nearby hauler drinking soup, another progress bar appears, finishes, and instantly changes to resting, proving the strange new vision is real. Even Uncle Lu now has a hovering label as he leans in, and Li Qi forces himself to answer before his shock gives him away. Li Qi quickly checks how long he was out and whether anyone followed him, because the danger from the strong force gang still comes first. When Uncle Lu says no one came after him, Li Qi grimly reveals the real threat. The strong force gang has somehow brought in a powerful expert who taught them a spell technique. When Li Qi says the strong force gang's reward was a spell technique, Uncle Lu freezes on the spot. Li Qi explains that besides the strange progress bar in his head, he also gained a vague piece of the technique as a wordless insight. The moment Uncle Lu hears Li Qi may have learned part of it, his despair flips into hope and he asks if the gang can be taught. Li Qi admits he still cannot use the technique or put it into words, because what he got feels more like a sensation than real knowledge. Uncle Lu recognizes this as divine will inheritance and finally treats Li Qi's strange condition as a huge stroke of luck. When Li Qi asks how Uncle Lu knows that term, Uncle Lu reminds him that the wave-breaking gang itself was founded on that kind of inheritance. Li Qi tells him the strong force gang got involved with a high-level master searching for an outer Dao object, and the spell was payment after they found something. After checking no one is listening, Uncle Lu explains that divine will inheritance is like having a whole book thrown into the mind and learned through steady practice. He even admits he learned wave-breaking force the same way, which is why this inheritance matters so much to the gang. Even after that, Uncle Lu still asks nervously whether Li Qi will share the spell once he learns it. Li Qi immediately promises he will not hide it from the gang, because he owes them and knows sharing the technique would strengthen all of them. Uncle Lu tells him to skip the rest of river opening and go study the inheritance in peace, promising the gang will cover for him. Li Qi refuses, because he knows the strong force gang saw him and will notice the moment someone from the haulers goes missing. Li Qi quickly lays out the cover story. The river opening must continue normally, and everyone has to say he only fainted from illness. Uncle Lu realizes Li Qi is right, agrees at once, and rushes out to make sure the whole gang keeps the same story. Back at the river, Li Qi spends the whole day hauling harder than ever, hiding his thoughts while secretly practicing the inherited method through his labor. By dusk the ice finally breaks and the river opening is complete, but Li Qi feels no relief because his mind is still stuck on what he inherited. After thinking it over all day, Li Qi concludes that the so-called outer Dao object was probably the ruined remains of his old game console. That guess leaves him bitter, because if the console had survived intact, he might have had a real system instead of this clunky progress bar. Still, the progress bar helps him identify the inherited insight at last. It shows up as learning, bull strength heart. Li Qi spends the whole day matching his body to that strange feeling while hauling, and by evening he manages to push bull strength art to 1%. Then a clerk shouts that the prefect will personally reward the haulers, and every exhausted man instantly scrambles over for the real reason they fought so hard today. Li Qi joins the crowd but stays cautious, hoping the prefect's presence and the garrison nearby might at least slow down any move against him. The riverbank is packed for miles with haulers, sailors, boatmen, weavers, and countless other groups gathered for the full ceremony. As Li Qi watches, the river opening ceremony progress bar climbs to 97%, which tells him the rewards are still part of the ritual itself. When the prefect arrives, tens of thousands of people along the river drop to their knees in one sweeping motion. Black-armored prefectural soldiers lead the procession, towering over the laborers with a cold contempt that makes them feel like insects. Behind the soldiers comes the prefect's lavish carriage, its whole frame carved into a grand geomantic map of Li Prefecture. The prefect sits atop the carriage while a handsome driver guides it from stop to stop for formal invocations and rewards. When the procession reaches the haulers, the prefect's declaration names their work as part of the spirit order governing Li Prefecture and promises them reward. The haulers receive a rich haul of giant pigs, fierce river fish, copper coins, and fresh ice, with the two gangs dividing the spoils between them. Even during the rewards, Li Qi spots another progress bar over the carriage, ceremony strengthening, and it finishes each time the rite for a group is completed. That makes Li Qi think of the scholar's earlier words and suspect the prefect is using a human way ritual to gather power from the ceremony. Then he looks back at the river and is jolted when the river opening ceremony itself still reads only 99%. A fellow hauler calls him over to help deal with the pigs and fish, already excited about a feast that could last the gang a year. Li Qi refuses to go, because the unfinished 99% keeps nagging at him more than the reward does. Before anyone can press him, Uncle Lu cuts in, says he already arranged something for Li Qi, and drives the others away with their spoils. Uncle Lu does not ask questions, because now that Li Qi has given his word, he answers with the same trust. Left alone, Li Qi realizes he is about to be cleared from the riverbank anyway, and that only sharpens his suspicion that the ritual still has something left to give. He starts chasing a reckless idea. If the ritual is still active, maybe someone who took part from the beginning can siphon off a little of its power. The gamble makes sense to him, because he has secretly learned a forbidden spell and refuses to stay a river hauler forever. Even knowing he has no proof this will work, Li Qi chooses to bet his future on that tiny opening. At the same time, the story jumps to the river observing tower, the 100-jan lookout that oversees both the river and the city. Today its top floor is no office at all, but a full ritual site packed with altars and 9 masked shamans dressed in lotus leaves and water plants. At the center stands the prefect in plain loose robes, gripping a wooden paddle and chanting as the shamans beat crocodile skin drums around him. As the rite rises, streams of water burst from the altars and pour into the prefect, while a strange force quietly spreads across the prefecture. The shamans collapse in exhaustion after the effort, but the prefect remains suspended inside the water and keeps speaking as if nothing is wrong. Then the young scholar from the Strong Force Gang affair steps forward, revealing he is close enough to the prefect to comment on the state's great ritual business. The prefect responds carefully, insisting that Great Lu is still founded on shamanism even if it now borrows human way methods to gather the power of the people. When the prefect turns the conversation, he reveals he knows the scholar has been using commoners lately and asks why. Mr. Zhu answers lightly that he divined an outer Dao object would appear in Li Prefecture and sent the Strong Force Gang to search for it. The prefect warns that using a grand ritual over something as unreliable as an outer Dao object is extravagant, but Mr. Zhu shrugs it off as only an incidental gain. Then Mr. Zhu suddenly senses a tiny weakness in the ceremony and points it out. The prefect dismisses it as a normal fluctuation near the end of the rite, because the loss is less than 1/10,000th. But downstairs, the cause is Li Qi, who has stayed behind and started copying the prefect's own river opening prayer. Because the characters are close enough to what he once knew, Li Qi understands the prayer and boldly edits it to ask for reward for his own division. At first nothing happens, so Li Qi keeps experimenting with different words, movements, and postures while watching the progress bar for proof. That is when he realizes the progress bar has a second use. It does not just show progress, it confirms whether what he is doing actually works. After 45 minutes of stubborn trial and error, Li Qi finally kneels flat before the river and chants in exactly the right way. This time a new progress bar finally appears with ceremony strengthening, 1%, proving he has really managed to tap into the ritual. And just as Li Qi cracks the method, the river opening ceremony itself reaches 99.8%, leaving him right on the edge of stealing something bigger. Alone after the ceremony, Li Qi copies the ritual motions again, and this time a thin trickle of water really flows into his body. The tiny water flow feels incredible, washing through Li Qi's limbs and mind and making his underfed body swell with new strength. When Li Qi looks again, 2 progress bars appear, ceremony strengthening at 92% and bull strength art at 100%. The moment that bar fills, the bull's strength art drops into his head like 10 years of practice had been forced into him at once. Li Qi knows this is not how normal divine inheritance works, because even Sixth Uncle's inherited wave-breaking force never reached this level. He guesses the progress bar may be the real reason he can learn so absurdly fast, and the gamble he took tonight suddenly feels worth it. Knowing patrols could catch him if he lingers, Li Qi hurries through the streets to slip home before anyone notices. At the next corner, an ironwood staff suddenly swings out of the dark and smashes into Li Qi's shoulder. The first hit nearly numbs half his body, and before he can recover, a second attacker closes in from behind. In the darkness, Li Qi spots 2 floating attack bars and finally understands there are exactly 2 men trying to kill him. Then the bull strength art kicks in on its own, hardening Li Qi's skin and flooding his body with violent heat and muscle. The next staff blow lands full force, but this time the stick shatters against Li Qi instead of breaking him. Li Qi exhales 2 blasts of hot white vapor straight from his nostrils, blinding the man in front of him. Feeling like a wild bull in human shape, Li Qi throws 1 punch and caves in the first attacker's body on the spot. At the same time, the second man stabs from behind, and Li Qi can only watch the attack bar finish before the knife hits him. The blade scrapes across Li Qi's hardened body like dull metal on leather, and the attacker freezes in disbelief. Li Qi whirls around to pin the second attacker, but the slam is so brutal that the back of the man's skull caves in and kills him instantly. The whole fight is over in less than 2 seconds, and Li Qi stands there stunned that he just killed 2 Strong Force Gang men almost effortlessly. Looking over the bodies, Li Qi decides they had to be Strong Force Gang men, because only that gang had both the motive and the strength to smash ironwood staffs. Li Qi feels no guilt about the deaths, because they tried to murder him first, but he is deeply shaken by how monstrous the bull's strength art really is. Before anyone finds the scene, Li Qi drags both corpses to the water and dives in to hide them under mud and stones. While washing away the evidence, Li Qi notices a new bull's strength art duration bar and realizes the spell only lasts about 10 minutes per use. He switches the spell off on purpose, and his swollen body shrinks back down like a punctured skin bag. That test teaches him 2 crucial rules at once. He can use bull's strength art 3 times a day, and the progress bars can also track the duration of his own spells. With this new power and this strange vision helping him, Li Qi finally dares to believe he might escape a hauler's life for good. By the time Li Qi returns to the wave-breaking gang base, the riverside yard is already in full festival mood after the river opening rewards. People cheerfully call out to Li Qi about the pork and wine, not realizing he now knows the Strong Force gang cares far more about the stolen spell than the feast. He also realizes the enemy made one fatal mistake. They still have no idea he mastered the bull's strength art overnight. To bait any enemy watchers, Li Qi keeps himself soaked from the river and deliberately leaves blood on his clothes so he looks like he barely escaped the ambush. Right in front of everyone, he suddenly limps and collapses, making the whole yard jump. When they rush to help, Li Qi brushes them off, claims he just slipped, and shuts himself inside his room before anyone can question him. Outside, the workers trade uneasy guesses about the blood and water on him, and one of them runs to fetch Sixth Uncle. Inside the dark shack, Li Qi sits on his bed and waits, already sure Sixth Uncle will come. The moment Sixth Uncle knocks, Li Qi pulls him in fast and slams the door shut to keep the talk private. Sixth Uncle arrives expecting bad news, but once the door closes he sees Li Qi is alert and standing just fine. Li Qi lowers his voice, blocks the door with a wooden stump, and tells Sixth Uncle to stay quiet and hear him out. He reveals that 2 strong force gang men ambushed him on the road with clubs and knives and tried to beat him to death. That makes Sixth Uncle blurt out that the strong force gang must have already discovered the theft. Li Qi admits he still does not know how they found out, but he is sure their own headquarters is probably being watched too. Sixth Uncle finally understands the act. Li Qi pretended to be hurt so any enemy watchers would think the ambush worked. When Sixth Uncle suggests hunting the spies down right away, Li Qi stops him and refuses to spook the enemy too early. Instead, Li Qi tells him to quietly spread word that he really is injured, so the strong force gang will relax and lower its guard. And when Sixth Uncle asks what that buys them, Li Qi answers with a hard fist and a simple plan: strike first. Elsewhere, the strong force gang's leader Lu Shan sits brooding, rubbing his temples and cursing the same name that keeps ruining his plans, Li Qi. Lu Shan is strong enough to haul a small boat alone, but what really makes him dangerous is that he thinks like a strategist, not just a thug. He remembers how he nearly crushed the wave-breaking gang before Li Qi showed up and dragged it back from the edge. Now Lu Shan's newest problem is even worse, because during the day he finally received the promised inheritance, and realized an outsider had been there too. That masked figure had a familiar build, and even though Lu Shan chased after him, the man got away. After hearing a witness describe a masked man who crashed into him, lost his face covering, and punched him hard, Lu Shan finally gets the clue that points to Li Qi. By the end of it, Lu Shan is certain the thief was Li Qi, and his rage spikes because once again the man who keeps blocking him is Li Qi. In Lu Shan's room, his frustration hardens into real danger when he decides stealing from Li Qi was no longer enough and starts thinking in terms of murder. He knows killing a man is far riskier than theft, because a murder serious enough to cause noise could bring official diviners to trace the clues. Even so, he cannot accept Li Qi walking away with that inherited spell technique, so he decides the risk is worth it. To keep it contained, Lu Shan arranges a quiet kill, tells his best men to leave no trace, and sets watchers on the wave-breaking gang. He only wants Li Qi dead before the technique spreads, because if he can hide for a year and study it, the strong force gang could rise above every other hauler gang on the riverside. His plan is blunt and ambitious: master this one technique, seize the other gang's methods too, and turn the strong force gang into the only real force left. Lu Shan calms himself with the rules of the bottom tier. People die in gang fights all the time, and unless someone pushes the case, the officials often prefer not to get involved. He also believes the gangs are too dirty to go to the authorities anyway, because once one side starts reporting crimes, everyone along the docks gets dragged down with them. With every angle seemingly covered, he convinces himself the hit should have gone cleanly. But as the minutes drag on and his killers still do not return, that confidence starts to crack. He knows exactly how dangerous those two men are, and on land he never believed Li Qi could survive an ambush from both of them. Then one of the watchers finally rushes back to report from the wave-breaking gang. The watcher says Li Qi made it home alive, but came back badly hurt, and the wave-breaking gang is already talking about selling pigs to hire a doctor. That news should have been good, but Lu Shan's face sinks instead, because if Li Qi returned alive, his two killers may be the ones who never made it back. He sends the watcher back to keep observing Li Qi's condition and stops him cold when the man starts gloating. Left alone again, Lu Shan weighs the possibility that Li Qi is faking weakness, but he cannot quite believe Li Qi escaped without paying a price. He finally works out the only answer he can accept: Li Qi must have tricked the attackers into the water and killed them there with wave-breaking force. That deduction only makes Li Qi more dangerous in Lu Shan's eyes, and his hesitation snaps. He tells himself one thing matters now: as long as Li Qi is still breathing, that spell technique is still at risk. Lu Shan remembers he still does not even know the technique's name, only that divine inheritance works like a teacher in the mind and usually takes at least a year to grasp, which is exactly why he feels he cannot wait. But a year is too long for him now, so he decides to gamble everything on one brutal answer: a night raid on the wave-breaking gang. He even readies an excuse for the aftermath, planning to call it retaliation for a stolen technique and trust his hidden backer to scare off deeper investigation. Then Lu Shan goes outside and loudly summons every nearby hauler he can gather. Under cover of night, Lu Shan leads more than 40 strong force gang haulers out in a tight, hurried column. For a bottom-tier hauler gang, a move on this scale is almost unheard of, and the sight of them in formation gives off a faint military edge. They keep off the main roads, moving through the cramped, filthy back alleys by the docks where outsiders could easily get lost. The line is not perfectly silent, but compared with the other gangs, Lu Shan's men are clearly trained for this kind of ambush. This route is no accident either, because Lu Shan has already thought through surprise attacks like this and rehearsed how to strike from the alleys. His ambition has always run deeper than simple hauling work, which is why he grabbed at the promise of spell technique without hesitation. 2/3 of the way there, the gang reaches a dark open clearing that Lu Shan uses as a mustering point before the final push. Standing in the blacked out clearing, Lu Shan starts whipping up the men by asking if they remember why they came tonight. The answer comes back at once. They are here to kill Li Qi for stealing what they believe is their spell technique. Lu Shan leans into that excuse on purpose, because shared profit and a righteous-sounding reason are what turn a mob into something close to a fighting force. He checks that they still remember his instructions, and the men answer together that they do. Then he spells out the strike. The wave-breaking gang worked all day, ate at night, and should be sleeping hard by now, so the attack must be fast and ruthless. He forbids blades and tells them to use only wooden sticks, because too much blood would hand the authorities a cleaner case. He warns them this is life or death and threatens to break the legs of anyone who ruins the job. Once fear has them steady, Lu Shan switches to temptation and promises a better future if Li Qi dies tonight. He paints the picture plainly. 1 year of practice, no rival hauler gangs left, higher prices, meat every day, wives, and even new houses. Then he reminds them what failure means. If Li Qi lives, the wave-breaking gang gets the technique too, and brutal price-cutting will crush their earnings. By the end of the speech, Lu Shan has the gang exactly where he wants them, bound by greed, fear, and shared anger at Li Qi. Before moving again, Lu Shan orders a roll call to make sure no one got lost in the pitch-black alleys. It is a routine his gang knows well, because night blindness and twisting dark alleys make it easy for men to stray during a march like this. But as Lu Shan counts heads one by one, his expression starts changing for the worse. When he reaches the end, Lu Shan realizes only 26 men are standing there. He explodes in fury, roaring into the night over how more than 10 men could have vanished before the attack even began. At the dockside clearing, Lu Shan does a head count and goes cold when he realizes nearly 20 of his men are missing. He stops worrying about stealth and shouts for everyone to stay sharp, sensing the raid has already gone bad. A heartbeat later, a massive boulder screams out of the darkness and slams straight into the crowd. The hit is brutal, killing several men on the spot and leaving the others sprawled and bleeding before they even understand the attack. Lu Shan charges the direction of the throw, but a second boulder comes for him, and he barely kicks it aside. Shaken but drilled well, the surviving haulers snap back into Lu Shan's formation and regroup around him. When Lu Shan shoves aside a flimsy plank wall, he finally sees the attacker and freezes in disbelief. The monster in front of him is Li Qi, swollen into an overage brute that barely looks human anymore. Li Qi grins at him and taunts, "Big strong Shan, didn't expect this, did you?" The instant Lu Shan hesitates, Li Qi bull rushes him with a sneak attack and blasts him backward. But Li Qi instantly realizes the hit felt wrong, because Lu Shan used the momentum to roll away instead of taking the full impact. Looking at Li Qi now, Lu Shan finally pieces it together. The missing men were picked off on the road, and Li Qi must have stolen the spell technique. Even after feeling how terrifying Li Qi's strength is, Lu Shan forces his voice steady and orders everyone to kill him together. Li Qi stays calm, because this is exactly the trap he expected Lu Shan to walk into. He had already guessed that once Lu Shan knew he was alive and had a spell technique, he would attack immediately instead of letting Li Qi grow stronger. So Li Qi struck first himself, slipping through the city's tributaries to infiltrate the Strong Force gang's area before Lu Shan could move. His original plan was to assassinate Lu Shan at the gang base, but he unexpectedly ran into Lu Shan leading the assault team out first. Li Qi quietly changed plans, followed them from the shadows, and started killing the stragglers one by one. With bull strength art active, snapping each neck took less than a second, and over a dozen men vanished before anyone noticed. By the time his third and final use of the technique was running down, Li Qi chose to stop stalking and open the real attack with boulders. Now, seeing Lu Shan's force cut from more than 40 men to barely over 20, Li Qi charges with savage confidence. The haulers are terrified, but Lu Shan's formation ties them together so tightly that they are dragged into the collision anyway. Li Qi slams into Lu Shan and is stunned when the impact only leaves his own shoulder numb instead of blowing the man apart. At the same time, Li Qi sees his bull strength art duration burn away fast from the collision, which tells him Lu Shan is getting a huge boost from somewhere. Then Li Qi notices 2 progress bars over Lu Shan, one for formation enhancement, and one for charging. Realizing the charge is about to peak, Li Qi lunges in with a headbutt and interrupts it before Lu Shan can finish. But an attack bar instantly fills instead, and Lu Shan's punch smashes Li Qi in the nose. The nosebleed matters more than the damage, because the haulers see giant Li Qi bleed and their fear finally eases. Li Qi also sees Lu Shan's formation enhancement drop, and he instantly realizes the real weakness here is morale. To break that morale, Li Qi rolls out of Lu Shan's reach and dives straight for an ordinary hauler inside the formation. His first punch caves the man's head into his chest, turning the fight from hard to outright horrifying. Lu Shan realizes exactly what Li Qi is doing and charges over in alarm, because once the men panic the formation is finished. Li Qi tanks another blow from Lu Shan, grabs a second man, and tears his head clean off in front of everyone. Covered in blood, laughing like a mad beast, Li Qi deliberately acts inhuman to crush whatever nerve the gang still has left. Lu Shan feels the formation slipping and desperately tries to force it back under control. In a last gamble, Lu Shan snatches up a rock and rushes Li Qi himself to save the men's courage. This time Li Qi refuses to dodge and takes the full hit just to get close enough for something worse. Half stunned and bleeding, Li Qi bites down on Lu Shan's nose and rips off a piece, finally making even Lu Shan scream. That grotesque sight breaks the rest of the gang, and some of the haulers turn to run. Lu Shan tries to shout the fleeing men back into line, but the moment he opens up, Li Qi hammers him again and staggers him hard. Lu Shan twists just enough that Li Qi's punch lands on his shoulder, but that small survival does not save the formation. Li Qi watches the enhancement reach its limit and disappear, and every surviving hauler feels the invisible bond snap at once. With the buff gone, the strong force men scatter in total rout, and Lu Shan loses the only thing that had let him stand up to bull strength art. Even alone and outmatched, Lu Shan still grabs a club and comes back at Li Qi like a man ready to die fighting. Li Qi thinks the fight should be easy now, but Lu Shan's formal combat training suddenly puts him on the ground. Without the formation boost, Lu Shan still cannot really hurt Li Qi, but his speed and technique keep beating Li Qi to every clean counter. Then Li Qi abruptly changes rhythm mid-exchange and uses raw force to catch Lu Shan off guard with a suplex. Li Qi follows with a knife hand strike meant to end it, but Lu Shan flips up and dodges again, now rattled by how fast Li Qi is learning. Only Li Qi knows the trick. By watching Lu Shan's progress bars in real time, he has already started learning how to interrupt attacks before they finish. In the freezing dockside darkness, Lu Shan is finally beaten down, and every desperate strike has already been read and shut down by Li Qi. Li Qi crushes Lu Shan's remaining resistance completely, breaking his hands and ruining his ankles until the gang leader can no longer fight back. When the dust settles, only the two of them are left alive in the clearing. Li Qi wipes blood and sweat from his face and feels sick, not from killing, but from forcing himself to bite raw flesh to terrify the haulers into breaking. He also knows how close this was, because even with bull strength art, the heavy blows he took have left his body rattled and split open in places. Li Qi admits to himself that if those 20-odd haulers had really held formation and fought to the death, he might have died here instead. Still in his swollen bull strength body, Li Qi sits beside the crippled Lu Shan and asks with blunt confidence whether Big Strong Shan is finally convinced. Lu Shan spits weakly onto himself and snarls that he lost, but there is no way he will ever say he is convinced by Li Qi. Li Qi drops the posturing and says he spared Lu Shan for one reason only: answer a few questions, and he can leave alive as a cripple instead of dying here. He even reminds Lu Shan that for all their hatred, both of them usually keep their word, so this offer is meant to sound believable. Lu Shan's tone softens just a little, and he finally asks what Li Qi wants to know. Li Qi goes straight to the real question. Lu Shan was never just a dock hauler, so where did he come from? Instead of answering, Lu Shan fires back that Li Qi is just as suspicious, a man who appeared out of nowhere 3 years ago in strange clothes with no cultivation at all. Lu Shan guesses that someone destroyed Li Qi's innate foundation and dumped him in Li Prefecture like trash, and the strange term makes Li Qi freeze for a beat. Li Qi realizes Lu Shan's guess is probably right, but he hides the reaction at once and turns the pressure back onto his prisoner. This time Lu Shan answers plainly. He is a deserter from the fallen Song Kingdom, driven here after Tang crushed his homeland. That confession clicks everything into place for Li Qi, because Lu Shan's discipline, martial skill, and morale-based formation all make sense if he came out of an army. But one problem still bothers him, so Li Qi asks why someone with those skills did not swallow the other two gangs years ago. Lu Shan explodes that he would have done exactly that if Li Qi had never appeared to wreck his timetable. He says he arrived alone 6 years earlier, built the Strong Force gang from nothing, and slowly trained it with a basic Song military method that also taught formation fighting. After years of build-up, he was finally ready to make real progress. But Li Qi's arrival forced him to pull back, hide his trump card, and wait even longer. Li Qi thinks it through and realizes his own alliance tricks with the Waterhorse gang and the Wave-Breaking gang had really stalled Lu Shan's rise for years. He also sees the rest of the chain clearly now. Lu Shan hid his formation until he got the spell reward, then moved fast, only to be ruined by Li Qi learning bull strength art in a single day. For one dry moment, Li Qi almost feels that Lu Shan was simply unlucky, before remembering that without that bad luck, he himself would be the one dead. Li Qi tries one last time to pry out the formation method, but Lu Shan instantly understands and refuses with pure hatred. Li Qi accepts that answer, because in this world cultivation methods are guarded like life itself and almost never shared without deep ties or a real exchange. He pretends to let the matter rest and tells Lu Shan to take care of himself now that the Strong Force gang is finished anyway. Then Li Qi ends it without hesitation and crushes Lu Shan's head in a single kick, deciding that keeping a man like this alive would be asking for revenge. With Lu Shan dead, Li Qi's next problem is immediate and ugly. The authorities will have to be dealt with before the massacre comes crashing back on him. Before he even rests, Li Qi hurries back and starts arranging the aftermath, because too many dead haulers mean families will report everything by morning. He gives sixth uncle instructions and lines up their story carefully, making sure the gang's testimony will stay consistent when officials start asking questions. Then Lychee sits down with charcoal and tough cowhide paper, because literacy finally gives him one useful advantage in a crisis. What he writes is not a confession but the full bull strength art, copied from memory in meticulous detail so the gang can keep the technique after he leaves. He does not really understand the deeper theory behind what he inherited through the progress bars, but he trusts the memory because the art works in his own body. He writes through the entire night until 4 full sheets are packed edge to edge with training details and practical steps. At dawn, Lychee hands the finished pages to sixth uncle and tells him not to worry about the theory, because the training method itself is enough to practice. Sixth uncle understands what that really means and asks, worried and reluctant, whether Lychee is truly planning to leave. Lychee says yes, because after killing so many people the government will investigate, so he has to vanish for a while and let the heat pass. He keeps his deeper confidence mostly to himself, believing that divination will have a hard time tracing someone like him anyway. So his plan is simple and risky: carry the blame himself, disappear before anyone can arrest him, and trust that an unsolved murder case will eventually go cold. He tells sixth uncle to insist that none of the others were involved, because Lychee is deliberately taking the whole burden onto himself. Sixth uncle, overwhelmed but practical, gives Lychee the river opening reward money and the gang's savings, then warns him that outside the gang, a man without status gets treated worse than a dog. Lychee straps the money onto his back, promises he will return, and leaves with the grim feeling of a wanted wanderer even though he is still just a ragged dock hauler. He does not head for the city gate at all, because the escape has already been arranged through the river instead. To stay hidden beneath a cargo boat, Lychee brings 2 ceramic jars sealed with oiled cloth so he can breathe trapped air underwater for much longer. The wave-breaking side has already helped from the shadows, taking the towing job for almost nothing just to make sure this boat is the one that carries him out. Once everything is in place, Lychee fills his lungs, dives into the icy river, and grips the underside of the hull. Hidden under the boat with wave-breaking force, he hears the haulers above break into their rough towing chant as the vessel starts pulling away from Li Prefecture. After killing his way out of Li Prefecture City, Lychee staggers along a remote mountain road, exhausted but still forcing himself toward Feng County to hide until the trouble blows over. He keeps going because the wild is dangerous in every direction. Water routes hide monsters, mountain paths hide beasts, and only human settlements feel remotely safe. Even so, winter is helping him survive. The cold keeps insects and many beasts down, so for now his worst enemy is plain exhaustion. When Lychee spots a roadside tea stall at last, he immediately heads for it, clutching a couple of copper coins like a lifeline. The stall is busy with merchant groups resting together, which makes Lychee standing there alone feel even more obvious. Lychee orders tea, and the tea master quickly wipes down a table and brings him a pot with 2 plates of free spirit rice cakes. He wolfs down a rice cake and warm tea, finally relaxing a little as he figures he can reach Feng County by tomorrow night. Just as he starts to relax, Lychee hears a stranger behind him ask if he is traveling alone on such a long road. Lychee turns and sees that the stranger is a lone merchant too, and that unusual detail makes him immediately more cautious. The young merchant nervously comes over, sits beside Lychee, and proposes that the two of them travel together for safety. Lychee stays cautious and pushes back with questions, asking where this merchant is headed and why a man so familiar with the road wants a stranger beside him. The merchant says he is heading for Bai County, explains the road stays the same until Feng County, and finally introduces himself as Adu. Then Adu quietly reveals why he really wants company. This road has a bad reputation because monsters have been haunting it. Lychee is startled, but Adu explains these are probably not true demons yet, just wild beasts close to turning spiritual, the kind that avoid large groups and strong human yang energy. When Adu adds that people only travel alone when life has already cornered them, Lychee can't help agreeing from bitter personal experience. Adu presses his case by praising Lychee's strong blood and chi, saying someone built like him is exactly the kind of partner that can scare off half-spiritual beasts. Lychee thinks it over and decides traveling with Adu is worth the risk, especially since one more capable man beside him is better than facing the road alone. He finally nods and agrees to team up until Feng County, and Adu immediately relaxes and starts talking more freely about how dangerous the next 200 li will be. Adu offers to share a few road lessons, couching it like casual storytelling, and Lychee catches the tactful move right away. Accepting both the partnership and the advice, Lychee slides his plate of rice cakes toward Adu, making the agreement feel settled. Adu starts explaining road lore, saying ordinary spirits and half-formed beasts fear humans because people are born with the 3 innate treasures. When the merchant names the treasures as spirit, chi, and essence, Lychee snaps to attention at chi, recognizing it as the clue he has been missing. At the roadside tea stall, Adu carefully explains the 3 innate treasures and starts by separating essence, chi, and spirit into different kinds of human power. He tells Lychee that essence is the body's raw vitality, the strength in blood, muscle, bone, and organs that gets spent through hard labor. Adu adds that spirit is mental sharpness, and Lychee jokingly says that must mean Adu has plenty of it. The mood turns serious when Adu says chi matters most, because it underlies spirit and drives all life and fate. Adu finally reveals why he is saying all this. If they can activate those treasures, they can suppress ghosts and monsters and survive the wilderness. Lychee is stunned that a stranger would offer him such a useful method, and his old suspicion immediately flares up. Adu admits he is not being generous for nothing, he just has something too important to deliver and wants better odds of surviving the road. When Lychee asks why he did not join one of the merchant groups, the question is overheard before Adu can answer. A huge rough-looking merchant stomps over in anger, making it clear exactly why Adu did not trust those men. Lychee smoothly apologizes, and the merchant backs off with a snort instead of turning the moment into a real fight. Once the danger passes, Adu quietly tells Lychee that a hot-headed pack like that would rob him and leave him dead in the wilds. Lychee realizes Adu chose him for the same practical reason. He looked less dangerous and easier to escape if things went bad. That thought makes Lychee check himself, and he suddenly sees how badly constant suspicion has been wearing on him. He decides caution is still necessary, but he no longer wants to treat every person like a hidden trap. So Lychee ends the tension with a simple suggestion to eat, rest, and keep traveling, quietly accepting Adu as a temporary partner. Later, after the two merchant caravans leave first, Lychee and Adu deliberately set out behind them instead of traveling alone in front. As they walk, Adu begins teaching Lychee a 16-character chant that can stir chi and bring out stronger vigor. The chant turns out to be trickier than it looks, because every tonal shift and breath has to land exactly right. Lychee keeps practicing for an hour, and his floating progress bar lets him correct mistakes fast instead of learning blind. The moment the bar completes, Lychee feels the same familiar jump from clumsy beginner to instant practical mastery. When Lychee finally sings the chant correctly, his blood surges with heat and the winter cold stops biting at him. Lychee is impressed by the chant's effect and looks at himself in surprise. Adu's praise catches him off guard, and Lychee covers it with a grin by joking that he must just be smart. As they keep moving, Adu warns that the chant drives off spirits by stirring young energy, but using it too often will drain you dry out here. Adu adds that when enough travelers keep the chant going together, even mountain monsters usually back off. As the sky darkens, Adu finally explains why they waited for dusk. The wild dog-like thing is probably active by day and sleeping now. Lychee realizes the merchants knew the same thing, and that their road experience may have saved him from walking straight into danger on his own. They push deeper into the route until the road turns into steep mountain paths that would be deadly to cross blindly at night. Adu proves he came prepared by stopping to oil and light a torch before the mountain darkness traps them. Lychee feels a little embarrassed by how unprepared he was, and even more certain that teaming up with Adu was the right call. For a while the climb stays quiet, with only cold wind, torchlight, and a few moths breaking the silence. Then Lychee suddenly freezes on the trail, because something ahead in the darkness feels wrong. In the torchlight ahead, Lychee spots a merchant caravan from the tea stall standing in a tight cluster on the narrow mountain road. The merchants are not just waiting, they are clanging machetes in rhythm and chanting into the night like they are driving something back. Lychee stares in shock as his strange vision overlays the merchants with a floating label, protective barrier at 25%. Before Lychee can process what he is seeing, a sudden icy gust cuts across the trail and sends a chill straight down his spine. When the merchants ahead seem to have run into trouble, Adu quickly urges Lychee to avoid getting involved and go around through the forest. They turn off the road toward the trees, hoping to slip around the danger while it stays focused on the caravan. Before Lychee can disappear into the woods, a tall burly merchant shouts for the two of them not to enter the forest, and Lychee realizes it is the same man who challenged him earlier. The warning merchant jumps right back into the blade-clashing chant, and Lychee realizes from his progress bar sight that the interruption cost the barrier precious time. Realizing the forest itself is the trap, Lychee whirls around and shouts for Adu to stop before he goes deeper. A glowing attack bar flashes in the darkness, and Lychee lunges forward to drag Adu back out of the trees by sheer force. A stinking giant maw erupts from the shadows where Adu had been standing, like the darkness itself just opened to swallow them. With no time to sing, Lychee triggers Bull's strength art on instinct and smashes the maw with a full-force punch. The maw blows apart into black mist, but the whole forest answers with beast-like roars and rolling demonic miasma. Shaken pale, Adu starts the chant, and Lychee sees that the song really can push the black mist back. Watching the glow hold back the fog, Lychee quickly figures out the chant works best when paired with Adu's own cultivation method. As the mist gives a little ground, Lychee turns and runs for the caravan right behind Adu. Instead of shutting him out, the merchant group opens their formation and lets Lychee rush inside under the protection of clashing steel and chanting voices. Now inside the circle, Lychee joins the chant himself and pushes out even stronger yang energy through Bull's strength heart. With Lychee and Adu reinforcing the circle, the merchants finally feel a little hope and commit to holding out until sunrise. They keep the chant and blade rhythm going without rest, because everyone knows stopping even for a moment means death. 10 minutes later, Lychee's Bull's strength boost starts fading, and after an hour the whole group is still trapped, exhausted, and nowhere near dawn. Seeing they will collapse long before sunrise, Lychee stops singing and bluntly says this defense is only a slower way to die. Lychee lays out a gamble. He will use bull strength art to fight the thing up close while the merchants back him up and drive it off whenever he starts losing ground. After making his case, Li Qi calmly drinks water and eats to recover, acting so steady that he starts pulling the others with him. Adu is the first to back Li Qi's gamble, and his quick support pushes the group toward action. The tall merchant who warned Li Qi earlier steps up next, agrees to the gamble, and offers him a drink if they live through it. Once the burly man commits, the rest follow, and one merchant even takes over his blade rhythm so the line stays stable as they reorganize. The moment the merchants lower their blades to execute the plan, the waiting mist surges at them like one enormous hungry mouth. Li Qi charges out with the tall merchant, who reaches the black mist first. The tall merchant's blood-smeared machete hits the mist like a bronze bell, and the recoil rips open his hand and throws him backward. When a strip of black mist peels off to swallow the spilled blood, Li Qi realizes the thing is trying to feed. A progress bar flashes over that move, and Li Qi interrupts it with a perfectly timed bull-strength punch before the mist can drink the blood. Back in the line, one merchant finally shouts what everyone just saw: "This black thing drinks blood." Li Qi barely has time to recover before the enraged mist lunges back at him as several giant fang maws at once. This is where the formation proves itself, as the chanting merchants step in together and blast the maws away from Li Qi. Hearing the mist shriek as it retreats, Li Qi realizes their plan really can wear it down. Li Qi snatches up the dropped machete and throws it back to the wounded merchant, pulling him back into the fight. Now that the rhythm is clear, they reset the formation to repeat it and grind the mist down. But just off the road, the battle has an unseen witness. A crumbling little shrine sits nearby, the kind usually tied to illicit roadside gods and shady spirits. Inside that broken shrine sits a beautiful, graceful woman, calm enough to listen to the chaos instead of fearing it. Listening to the distant chant and bull strength art, the woman frowns and wonders if a shaman has finally come for her. Far beyond the central plains, Baiwei is introduced as a land of mountain spirits, river monsters, shamans, and wild local gods that grew from incense and fear instead of imperial approval. The contrast is sharp. In the central plains, every temple is state-approved, but in Baiwei, power once belonged to local shamans, and the beings they fed with worship. Inside a Baiwei shrine, a delicate woman who has fled from the central plains wonders bitterly whether the Tang court really thinks it can command even this distant land. After thinking it through, she admits old Baiwei is gone, because Tang rule has spread into the region and even local states now copy its counties, prefectures, and officials. What truly unsettles her is bull strength art, because that spell belongs to Baiwei grand shamans, so she decides she has to see with her own eyes who is using it. The narration explains why she reacts so strongly. Bull strength art is a real Baiwei shamanic foundation spell, the entry point to the 10,000 beast path that borrows power from gods through inherited rights. Because these arts rely on divine pacts and inheritance, the text makes clear they cannot be copied by accident, and forcing them without the right lineage should fail, or even cause backlash. The woman slips into the black mist on the mountain path, and instead of resisting her, the mist wraps around her as if it belongs to her side. Hidden in the fog, she watches Li Qi, Ba Kui, Adu, and the merchants steadily grind the black mist down while their teamwork covers every opening before it can punish a mistake. After only a few minutes, the mist is already wavering, and the woman finally relaxes because this does not look like a grand shaman probing for her. She reasons that a true grand shaman would never send a disposable pawn, and if one came looking, they would hunt her superior instead of wasting time on her. Just as she is about to slip away, danger jolts through her when Li Qi suddenly turns out of the fight and charges straight at her hiding place in the fog. Back on Li Qi's side, the reason is simple. While staying alert for an ambush, he suddenly sees a new progress bar appear in the fog labeled Observation, 1%. Li Qi instantly realizes the real controller has quietly entered the mist, so he pretends to keep fighting and prepares to flush them out before they can strike first. Then Li Qi suddenly shouts for everyone to charge, and Ba Kui immediately catches on and roars for the others to follow. The whole group stampedes into the fog at once, with over a dozen tough merchants singing and smashing machetes together so loudly that the mist loses control of the field. In the confusion, Li Qi catches a hidden human-shaped body in the mist and realizes from the soft feel that this is probably a woman, not another male fighter. He yells that he has someone, and even though the captive struggles, Li Qi's raw strength locks her in place like an iron vice. Ba Kui hacks at the surging black mist to protect Li Qi, and the merchant's chanting clash drives the fog back before it can snatch the target away. With one brutal yank, Li Qi tears the hidden figure fully out of the black mist and finally exposes that his captive is a wounded woman in torn white clothes. Li Qi yanks a human figure out of the mist, then freezes for half a beat when he realizes it is a woman. The black mist immediately tries to take her back, rushing in so desperately that Li Qi realizes this woman matters more than anything else in the fight. Li Qi throws the woman behind him and answers with 3 heavy punches, but this time the mist stops scattering and instead engulfs him outright in a last-ditch grab. Cornered inside the fog, Li Qi instantly starts singing the Yang activation chant at full volume. The chant ignites his chi like fire, and with bull strength art already active, his blazing Yang force bursts outward and shoves the black mist away from his body. When the merchants rush in again with shouting voices and clanging machetes, the black mist finally loses its nerve and retreats instead of blocking them anymore. Li Qi seizes the opening and tells everyone to run before the thing changes its mind, and this time nobody argues with him. As the whole merchant group bolts, nobody stops for the woman they just rescued, leaving Li Qi staring after them in disbelief. Li Qi hesitates, because the woman could be a victim or a monster in disguise, and he has only seconds to decide before the black mist comes back. Looking closer, he notices that her white gauze clothes were originally expensive but are now filthy, torn, and blood-stained, making her look like a kidnapped noble girl rather than a wilderness monster. Li Qi briefly wonders whether rescuing her might even earn a reward, but the practical question underneath is whether he can live with abandoning her here. In the end, his conscience wins, and he decides to carry her to Feng County and sort out the truth in daylight. So Li Qi runs after the others with the woman on his back, gambling that if she is a monster, daylight or fate will settle it later. The escape turns brutal, because the entire group runs for more than 2 hours through the mountains until even trained bodies are nearly spent. One detail nags at Li Qi the whole way. After that much jostling, the woman still never wakes up. Only when dawn starts to brighten the horizon do they finally stop, collapsing across the rocky mountain path like people who barely outran death. Ba Kui is still steady enough to warn everyone not to drink water too soon, then he drops against a tree as spent as the rest. Li Qi is in even worse shape, because he has carried the unconscious woman the whole time, and when he finally sets her down, he drops beside her and gasps on the dirt without caring how filthy it is. He realizes this is not normal tiredness anymore, because his body feels weak in a sickly way that rest does not immediately fix. Once he recovers a little first, Ba Kui walks over, introduces himself properly, and admits he judged Li Qi wrong earlier because the skinny-looking hauler turned out to be genuinely brave. Ba Kui even promises a drink in Feng County to celebrate, and Li Qi can only weakly agree before nearly folding over from one hearty slap on the shoulder. Still curious, Ba Kui asks why Li Qi bothered to save the unconscious woman at all and jokes that maybe he liked her. Li Qi answers honestly that he just could not leave her there to die, even if bringing her along might become trouble. Seeing how badly Li Qi is fading, Ba Kui hands him a small paper packet and says this will help him recover faster. Inside is coarse salt, and Ba Kui tells him to take a sip of water with a pinch of it to get his strength back. Li Qi thanks him and tries it, but the first taste that hits his tongue is not salt at all, it is a strange bitterness. After half an hour of rest at dawn, the merchant group looks recovered, but Li Qi is only pretending to be fine, while his body still feels weak and shaky inside. The merchants crowd around Li Qi to praise him as the brave man who helped everyone survive the night, and he answers them with easy smiles instead of acting distant. Li Qi quietly knows they only made it through because the machete formation held the black mist back and Ba Kui fought beside him at the key moment. With the danger gone for now, the group boils dry spiritual rice patties with salt and wild greens, and the plain hot soup feels like a real reward after the long night. Over breakfast, a merchant laughs that meeting Li Qi twice was pure luck, because without that coincidence both groups might have been finished. Li Qi agrees and drinks with them, enjoying the unexpectedly good soup and the rare feeling of sitting among people who now trust him. Then Adu sits down beside Li Qi again and bluntly brings up the real problem. The rescued woman still has not woken up. Adu warns that if Li Qi carries her all the way to Feng County, he could end up paying for a doctor and still get dragged into a murder investigation if she dies. Li Qi rubs his temples in frustration, because he already knows saving her could turn into endless expense, explanations, and trouble either way. He can already picture every burden waiting for him in the city, from dealing with guards to paying for treatment, clothing, and whatever happens if she survives but has nowhere to go. But Li Qi also knows that dumping a helpless woman in the city, or on the roadside would be almost the same as leaving her to be destroyed. Adu gives his hard answer anyway. They already pulled her out once, so if she dies later, Li Qi should leave her and stop there. The other merchants quickly back Adu up, insisting that nobody on the road can afford to invite this kind of trouble onto themselves. Then Ba Kui glances at the woman, laughs, and asks the question that turns the whole mood strange. Li Qi is not married yet, is he? Once Ba Kui says it out loud, the men start teasing that Li Qi only wants to keep the woman because she is beautiful. Ba Kui even gives him rough marriage advice, saying a pretty woman with soft skin and no work marks may look good, but she is useless for a hard life. The others pile on with crude talk about childbearing, housework, and how beauty is a bad bargain if a woman cannot carry the household. They keep going until the whole conversation sounds absurd, with men seriously comparing a rescued stranger to brothel visits and household labor. Adu unexpectedly switches sides and says Li Qi is capable enough to make money someday, so if he really wanted a beautiful wife like this, he could afford servants and never need her to do rough work. The group follows with loud flattery, but Li Qi is left staring at them in disbelief because saving an unconscious stranger has somehow turned into talk of marrying her. Li Qi is still trying to process the nonsense when one merchant goes far uglier and suggests he should just force himself on the unconscious woman and throw her away afterward. The man even jokes that Li Qi is her savior, as if that would entitle him to her body, and this time Li Qi is openly disgusted. Li Qi gets to his feet and walks toward the woman in a half-joking, annoyed way, starting to answer back that he is not that kind of man. Before Li Qi can finish his sentence, the woman suddenly trembles and wakes up. Li Qi is immediately relieved, because now that she is conscious, the impossible decision he was wrestling with might finally solve itself. He steps closer and directly asks the frightened stranger for her name. Instead of answering normally, the beautiful stranger recoils in terror and blurts out that she is very powerful, warning Li Qi not to come any closer. Her panic makes sense once the story shifts to her side. This woman is Shinshubi, a rabbit demon who once served a lady but lost everything after they fled into Baiwe. While escaping human cultivators, Shinshubi lost her magical artifact and had to disperse her own cultivation just to shake the divine sense they planted in her. She thought she had found a little safety in a ruined temple with an enlightened wild dog, until she ran into Li Qi and recognized the bull strength art as a grand priest lineage technique. To Shinshubi, the grand diviners and grand priests are not ordinary spell users but the terrifying old peak of Baiue's shamanic path, backed by ghosts, spirits, and divine authority. Because Li Qi seemed to carry one of those exclusive ritual arts, Shinshubi panicked and chose to flee instead of staying near him. She summoned black mist with the burial chi art, a concealment spell that rides hidden life chi to erase her trace from sight. But Li Qi somehow saw through the mist anyway, and the merchant's pig-killing machetes stirred up enough fierce killing energy to drive her concealment back and expose her. Already injured and stripped of most of her cultivation, Shinshubi realized she had no good way to resist if Li Qi really was that kind of shaman. So she fell back on the rabbit demon's oldest instinct and played dead, hoping Li Qi would decide she was too troublesome and abandon her. Instead, Li Qi proved annoyingly kind and carried her for 2 full hours when she wanted nothing more than to be left alone so she could escape. At first she secretly celebrated when the merchants urged Li Qi to leave her behind, because that would have let her bolt the moment they walked away. Then Ba Kuei guessed that Li Qi wanted her for her looks, and Shinshubi was so sheltered she nearly broke character just from hearing it. When one merchant suggested taking her by force and dumping her body afterward, Shinshubi's fear jumped from ordinary danger to sheer terror. Seeing Li Qi actually walk toward her with a smile almost made her rabbit ears pop out from fear, and in that instant she decided she would rather fight than be humiliated. But the moment she really thinks it through, Shinshubi realizes Li Qi did not look excited at all before this, and her desperate resolve collapses into pure frightened confusion. So the moment turns painfully awkward. Shinshubi jolts awake in the dawn camp, blurts out that she is very powerful, and recoils from Li Qi as if she expects him to do something terrible. When the young woman finally wakes up, Li Qi actually smiles, because a conscious rich girl should be easier to deal with than dead weight on the road. Her gauze clothes tell Li Qi she comes from serious wealth, which makes him immediately wonder why no one powerful came looking for her before he did. Before Li Qi can gently test her, Shinshubi sees his grin, panics, and lets out a frightened, almost animal sound as she rolls away from him. Ba Kuei frowns that the demon's scare may have driven her mad, and one merchant crudely says that would only make her easier to throw away after using her. That ugly remark makes Li Qi see the group more clearly, ordinary merchants on the surface, but the kind who could turn into bandits the second they smelled weakness. Shinshubi hurriedly blurts out that she is not crazy and begs them not to touch her, her stammering mouth and quick movements not matching at all. Li Qi drops the smiling nonsense and calmly asks her name, deciding he will have to guide this conversation himself. She gives her name as Shinshubi, and Li Qi follows up by asking whether she was abducted by the monster, and whether she remembers where home is. Shinshubi starts to say her home is in Jiannan, then abruptly covers her mouth, as if she just exposed too much. Li Qi and the merchants have never heard of Jiannan, but Adu remembers hearing the name Jiannan Dao from a much larger caravan tied to the Tang dynasty. The moment Tang is mentioned, Li Qi presses harder, and Shinshubi frantically insists it is just a coincidence, and her Jiannan is some tiny unknown place. When Li Qi asks whether the demon has anything to do with her, Shinshubi answers too fast, and that alone is enough to set everyone on edge. The merchants instantly step back and draw machetes. Adu ducks behind them, and Shinshubi realizes she has talked herself into danger. Instead of joining the panic, Li Qi quietly waves behind his back for the others to get ready to leave without exposing her. He keeps acting harmless, telling Shinshubi that if she has no link to the demon, then that is a relief and there is nothing to worry about. Then Li Qi politely says they are just poor travelers with no power to escort her home, so they should part ways right here. Shinshubi is so relieved she eagerly agrees to go by herself and forgets to stay suspicious. Li Qi even leaves her the rice patties in the pot, and Shinshubi bows and thanks, completely dropping her guard. The instant Li Qi turns away, the whole group stuffs away their blades, grabs their packs, and bolts without looking back. Li Qi keeps running because he is now convinced Shinshubi is tied to the shape-shifting demon, and nobody in the fleeing group wants to stay behind long enough to confirm it. The merchants stop chatting entirely, and push themselves all day on nothing but water until they finally stagger into Feng County at dusk. Safe at last near the county seat, Ba Kuei praises Li Qi for staying calm in front of a demon when everyone else was ready to panic. Li Qi admits he was bluffing the whole time and had been ready to fight if Shinshubi stopped pretending to be harmless. Adu backs him up, saying Li Qi was smart not to expose the act too early, because that might have triggered another deadly clash on the road. Now that the danger has passed, the merchants pile on their own demon stories and decide Li Qi escaped because he guessed the thing's strange rules before anyone else did. No one blames Li Qi for carrying Shunshubi earlier, because if demons really followed out rules, refusing to save her might have gotten them all killed anyway. With Foam County's walls and officials nearby, everyone finally believes they are in a place even demons should hesitate to enter. Once they can breathe again, the road companions begin splitting up, because the shared danger is over and each of them has separate business waiting. Adu is the first to leave, giving a simple farewell and slipping off alone again toward whatever urgent winter errand brought him onto the road in the first place. The other merchants also drift off one by one, keeping their private destinations to themselves as the temporary company breaks apart. Bakue alone makes a friendly promise to meet Li Qi here again tomorrow morning for the drink he still owes him before heading on to Lianxia at noon. After the others are gone, Li Qi notices a crowd around the city gate notice board and wanders over instead of entering right away. The fresh notice says 12 merchants met a demon and died on the road, and for one cold instant Li Qi is horrified enough to wonder if Bakue's group had been ghosts all along. Then he checks the portraits below and realizes these are different people entirely, which kills the ghost panic but not the chill in his spine. Looking harder, Li Qi recognizes the dead men as one of the two merchant groups he had seen resting at the roadside tea stall, and the danger of traveling alone suddenly feels even uglier than before. Below that, he finds a much grander yellow cloth warrant announcing a massive reward for Lady Luofu, a demon deity fugitive who defied Tang and fled into Baiwei. Li Qi barely lingers on that one, because a rebel powerful enough to earn rewards like that is far beyond anything a hauler like him could touch. Then Li Qi reads one notice lower and suddenly sees his own face staring back at him. At the city notice board, Li Qi finds the public proclamation about the killings and realizes the officials are describing his rampage as a murderous red-skinned demon. The reward is laughably low, so Li Qi almost scoffs at how little a dozen deaths are worth in this world. What bothers him more is the claim that he was possessed, and he quickly guesses that Uncle Lu fed the authorities that version on purpose. He works through the logic calmly. The Strong Force gang survivors knew the demon was him, but once he vanished, the case would shift onto Li Qi as either a corrupted man or a possessed one. He also trusts his gamble paid off, because divination should have trouble tracking an outsider like him. That leaves the authorities with only portraits to hunt by, and Li Qi is confident Uncle Lu would have made sure his face was drawn badly enough to protect him. He decides this trouble will fade if he keeps his red-skinned bull strength form hidden, lies low for a while, and later returns under a new name. Thinking about how merchants like Bakue can kill when it suits them and still go on living, Li Qi sees the wanted notice as one more sign that this world only respects power. That thought hardens into resolve. After nearly dying on this trip, he wants strength badly enough to protect himself for real. For tonight though, survival is simpler than ambition, and Li Qi just decides he needs a place to sleep. He knows joining a new gang or sect would not solve anything quickly, because trust in this world is earned with years or with your life. Remembering how hard he had to work even to earn the wave-breaking gang's faith, he realizes starting over elsewhere would probably leave him buried at the bottom again. So instead of chasing another faction, he quietly counts himself lucky for stumbling onto a real spell technique by accident. Before settling in, Li Qi pays the 1 head tax at the city gate, and receives the wooden check pass token every outsider in the city needs. The city's record system still strikes him as bizarrely loose, but he files that away and focuses on getting through the night. He refuses to waste money on an inn, pulls out his own dry food, and starts buying the cheapest rice items he can stash for later. Even this small errand turns into another reminder that everyone in this world, even farmers, relies on some kind of technique to survive. At a roadside tea stall, he settles down with a pot of tea, free rice cakes, and his own rations, determined to fill up on the cheapest meal possible. He chews until his jaw aches, washing the dry food down with tea and eating steadily until dusk turns into night. When he finally finishes everything and feels full, the one bright thought he keeps is that Bakue is paying for tomorrow's meal, so maybe meat is coming soon. With only a little over 900 yen left, he keeps wandering the night streets, and carefully guards every coin. At last he finds a large house with deep overhanging eaves, sits down underneath, and claims that narrow strip of shelter as his bed for the night. Years of hauling have taught him how to sleep anywhere, so he curls into the corner without complaint because this is still cheaper than an inn. At least tonight he is warm enough and full enough, which makes the miserable spot feel almost acceptable. Before closing his eyes, he ties his bundle to his hand and hugs it to his chest so no thief can take it without waking him. Exhaustion wins fast, and Li Qi finally falls asleep under the eaves. But even while he sleeps in the street, someone nearby is already watching him with deliberate interest. In that inn room, Mr. Zhu studies Li Qi from the window and judges him far too clever and composed to be an ordinary hauler, which makes him suspect Li Qi really is an outsider. He reminds himself that a grand ritual pointed him toward an outsider who would bring him great fortune, so now he is trying to decide whether that omen meant Li Qi or the strange object in his hand. After probing the device with every method he knows, Mr. Zhu has learned only one thing: the dead machine still reacts faintly to weak electric current. His thoughts are cut off by muffled struggling from the bed behind him. The source is Shinshubi, trapped on the bed by a silent spell after Mr. Zhu already stripped away her cultivation. Mr. Zhu reveals he knows exactly who she is, Lady Luofu's personal maidservant, and he treats her capture as a gift delivered by fate. He offers her one path forward: cooperate now, or he will take her back to Wishen Mountain instead. Then he drives the threat deeper, saying the grand diviners of Wishen Mountain could use her connection to Lady Luofu to trace her mistress down. That lands perfectly, and Shinshubi breaks into tears because she knows Lady Luofu could die because of her. After crying for a moment, Shinshubi wipes her face and nods that she will cooperate. Satisfied, Mr. Zhu casually releases the restraints and lets her speak again. Shinshubi addresses him shakily as a grand priest, and he corrects her with polite self-importance, saying he is only a ritual priest. He tries to reassure her that if he truly wanted to hand her over, he would have done it already, so she should recognize that he is offering a better deal. The strange part is that this finally works, and Shinshubi visibly relaxes as if only now understanding his intentions. Once she calms down, Mr. Zhu changes tactics and asks whether she believes Baiwe has already fallen under the human way. Shinshubi repeats Lady Luofu's blunt view that Baiwe no longer truly reveres the shamanic way, and the answer immediately darkens Mr. Zhu's mood. He pushes back hard, insisting Wishen Mountain still commands Baiwe no matter how many counties, cities, and officials now fill the land. Shinshubi innocently asks why the whole region looks governed by human way laws if that is true, and the question irritates him even more. He cuts her off, calls that beside the point, and finally reveals what he really wants: Lady Luofu should come to Wishen Mountain and meet the shamanic lords. Shinshubi points out the obvious problem that Lady Luofu is not here, so none of this helps unless someone can reach her. Mr. Zhu ends the exchange with his plan at last. He will send a messenger through Shinshubi to notify Lady Luofu. When Mr. Zhu says Shinshubi is being released, she blurts out her surprise before he corrects her at once. He tells her the real plan: she will take his messenger to Lady Luofu and deliver Wishen Mountain's offer to shelter her against Tang pressure. Shinshubi cautiously asks why the Baiwe people now dress in Tang-style clothes instead of animal skins, and the question instantly sours Mr. Zhu's mood. Before she gets any answer, Mr. Zhu lashes out, and the blow hits Shinshubi like a hammer to the soul. Her spirit is ripped out of her body, and the inn's walls stop meaning anything as she drops through a warped, ghostly world. For one terrifying instant, she sees Avicii hell itself, with burning souls screaming in endless agony. Then she is slammed back into her body, left speechless and nauseous from what he just forced her to endure. Mr. Zhu finally explains that he carved a Wishen Mountain soul imprinting to her as a letter for Lady Luofu. He adds that the imprint is not for tracking, and if he truly wanted Lady Luofu found by force, he could simply sacrifice Shinshubi and divine her location. Then he walks to the window, points down into the street, and reveals that his messenger will be Li Qi. Mr. Zhu vanishes on the spot, leaving Shinshubi alone to process the threat and the mission. Down below, Li Qi is sleeping harder than usual after finally getting food, drink, and a chance to rest from the brutal journey. Even so, the feeling of someone nearby jolts him awake, because a poor hauler with a bag of coins never really sleeps without worry. The moment he sees who is standing there, Li Qi nearly falls over in shock, because it is the same young scholar from the Strong Force gang affair. Mr. Zhu quietly warns him not to shout and draw attention in the middle of the night. Li Qi forces himself to calm down, realizing resistance is pointless against someone this powerful and that he needs to figure out what Mr. Zhu wants. When the young scholar gives his surname as Zhu, Li Qi instantly bows and starts flattering him as hard as he can. Mr. Zhu is amused that Li Qi talks much better than Shinshubi, and he confirms that he really does need something done. Then Mr. Zhu drops the real pressure point on him by saying, with a smile, that Li Qi is about to die. Li Qi's heart drops, but he quickly reads the situation and answers like a man begging to stay useful rather than a man arguing for his life. Pleased enough, Mr. Zhu says Li Qi is clever even if not fully sincere, and he starts probing how much Li Qi has understood about the Strong Force gang incident. He openly admits that the Strong Force gang affair was his plan from the start, and that both the outsider object and the outsider person were its targets. Li Qi answers carefully that he has guessed a little, but Mr. Zhu's scheme is too large for him to see all at once. Mr. Zhu decides to test him properly, and says he will give him clues so Li Qi can deduce the whole situation himself. Li Qi immediately accepts the challenge, eager to prove he is worth using. Mr. Zhu hushes him again and starts with a basic question about Baiwe, turning the conversation into a lesson in power and geography. Li Qi admits he knows almost nothing beyond a wanted poster saying Great Lu sits in Baiwe territory. Mr. Zhu explains that Great Lu is just one tiny kingdom among hundreds in Baiwe, and even all of Baiwe is only a small frontier region beside the vast Tang dynasty. He then reveals his own background, telling Li Qi that he comes from Wishen Mountain and serves as a ritual priest of the shamanic way. Mr. Zhu goes on to say that regions near Tang, like Great Lu and Song, are already deeply shaped by Tang systems and look more like tributary states than old Baiwe lands. Once Lady Luofu's escape into Baiwe is added to that picture, Mr. Zhu asks the real question: what does Li Qi think Wishen Mountain wants from him? That question makes Li Qi break into a cold sweat, because he finally connects Jian Nan Dao, the demon he met on the road, and Lady Luofu's flight. In a rush of thought, Li Qi realizes Great Lu is sitting on the edge of a struggle between Wushan Mountain and the Tang dynasty, and the entire northern Baiyu may be the real chessboard. He starts rereading everything he has seen through that new lens, from strict laws that are barely enforced to city passes that stop mattering once you leave each city. The contradiction tells him Tang influence has already remade the region's institutions, which also suggests Wushan Mountain is the side being pushed back. From there, the next step is obvious to him. If Tang is hunting Lady Luofu, Wushan Mountain would want her as an ally. He even wonders whether the foolish demon woman he met could be Lady Luofu herself, then rejects it immediately because her behavior was nowhere near that level. But if Xingshubi came from Jiannan Dao and was tied to Lady Luofu, then she was almost certainly one of Lady Luofu's people. That also leads Li Qi to a colder insight. Since an outsider cannot be divined, Mr. Zhu probably did not find him by magic tonight but may have been watching him all along. Once he follows that thought further, even the bull strength art, his ritual chants, and the river ritual start to look less like luck and more like parts of Mr. Zhu's test. He ends on a bold guess that Xingshubi was captured. He himself was selected because he is an outsider, and that trait must matter for the mission ahead. So Li Qi carefully states his conclusion. Mr. Zhu wants him to serve as a messenger, use Lady Luofu's people to reach her, and open talks between Wushan Mountain and Tang's hunted fugitive. Mr. Zhu is impressed and confirms Li Qi got it right, saying only someone this sharp is fit to meet Lady Luofu. He adds that the demon Li Qi met was actually a rabbit demon, and her name is Xingshubi. Mr. Zhu bluntly says Xingshubi is as foolish as a rabbit, but she happens to be Lady Luofu's personal maidservant, which makes her useful. Then he lays out the mission plainly. Li Qi will take Xingshubi to Lady Luofu, and his outsider nature will keep the trip hidden from divination while proving Wushan Mountain's sincerity. As payment, Mr. Zhu offers Li Qi entry into Wushan Mountain as his apprentice, and to Li Qi that sounds like a lifeline too good to miss. Li Qi instantly bows and calls him master on the spot, grabbing at the chance without even pretending to hesitate. Mr. Zhu immediately corrects him, saying apprentice is not the same as disciple and that Li Qi still should not call him master. And with Li Qi hooked, Mr. Zhu circles back to the warning from earlier and asks again whether he knows why Mr. Zhu said he was about to die. Li Qi drops his hesitation, bows deeply, and begs Mr. Zhu to teach him, because clinging to this powerful backer is his only safe path now. Mr. Zhu studies him in silence, weighing one key advantage. As an outsider, Li Qi has a clean background and is far less likely to be someone else's planted pawn. Having decided the investment is worth it, Mr. Zhu finally explains what Li Qi has been practicing, the bull strength art. He says the bull strength art comes from the greater 10,000 beast art, a Wushan Mountain system built through pacts with countless earth deities. Mr. Zhu lays out Wushan Mountain's three paths: human ghosts, earth deities, and heavenly spirits, then focuses on the earth deity path Li Qi has already stumbled into. He explains that earth deities are local gods of mountains, rivers, fields, and households, and most of them began as spirits or monsters rooted to one place by worship and incense. Because so many earth deities are beasts, Wushan Mountain drew on their powers to create thousands of matching spiritual arts inside the myriad beast diagram. Then Mr. Zhu reveals the source of Li Qi's own art, a white four-eyed divine bull from Li Prefecture called Qiong, famous for brute strength, tough hide, and a body large enough to carry mountains. Every time Li Qi used bull strength art, he was actually borrowing that bull god's power through the myriad beast diagram, which is why his body swelled, his blood surged, and his skin hardened. Mr. Zhu praises the art as a true Wushan Mountain shaman technique with no side effects, but only if the user is an actual shaman. Since Li Qi was not a shaman, the spell had been running on his own human qi instead, burning through the force that should support his body and spirit. Mr. Zhu says it plainly. The weakness Li Qi has been feeling is the cost of that drain, and if he kept going, he would grow feebler and eventually die. Li Qi finally understands his recent collapse, and the thought hits hard. If he had failed Mr. Zhu's test or run away, the bull strength art would still have killed him soon. But Li Qi's first real panic is not for himself. He blurts out that he already taught bull strength art to the wave-breaking gang, and now they may all be in danger too. He urgently begs for time to go warn them before the same hidden price kills them off one by one. That answer pleases Mr. Zhu, because Li Qi's concern proves he is clever without being cold-blooded, more apprentice material than a disposable pawn. Mr. Zhu grants permission, saying Li Qi can do as he likes as long as he does not delay the journey to find Lady Luofu. Then his tone turns grave as he warns Li Qi never to practice profound methods casually again, because in this world, the better the technique, the easier it is to die from using it wrong. With the lesson over, Mr. Zhu makes the offer explicit. If Li Qi accepts the mission, he will formally enter Wushan Mountain as an earth deity ritual priest. Li Qi agrees at once, nodding hard because there is no reason left to refuse. Mr. Zhu taps Li Qi's forehead and starts another divine will inheritance. But this one feels completely different from the brutal memory dump before. Instead of a painful flood, Li Qi feels something cool and light settle into his mind, as if a book has been placed there for him to open whenever he wants. Sensing the confusion, Mr. Zhu explains that older divine will inheritance forced a master's understanding directly into disciples and could warp them into copies of the teacher. He says later sages refined the technique so it passes on original text instead of someone else's personal interpretation. So the inheritance will not magically make Lychee understand everything, but it does let him carry a library in his head and consult it whenever he needs. That leaves Lychee quietly humbled, because this world clearly already solved the kind of clever shortcuts and reforms he might once have imagined. When he examines the inheritance properly, he finds its title is simply Zhu, but what sits in his mind feels less like one manual and more like a massive encyclopedia. The book contains a staggering range of knowledge, from the 9 provinces and the stars down to roads, ditches, plants, insects, medicine, commerce, law, and ritual. Lychee realizes the cultivation part is only a small slice of it, because a ritual priest first needs to understand the world well enough to conduct sacrifices correctly. The inheritance still leaves the memorizing to Lychee, but when he thinks of a topic, the stored text rises up for him like a searchable book in his own mind. To test it, Lychee thinks of the start of spring, and the book immediately brings up ritual details about the earth ox, seasonal signs, red beans, 5-colored rice, and warding off sickness. The deeper he looks, the more the book spills out whole systems of sacrifice, bad omen rites, funeral rites, military rites, spirit classification, and even ways to read clouds and seasonal winds. Even with the book in his head, much of it is still beyond him, leaving Lychee feeling like a child staring at advanced lessons he cannot yet decode. Compared to that ocean of knowledge, the actual cultivation method is almost simple. The ritual priest path splits into heaven spirits, earth deities, and human ghosts, and Lychee has received the earth deity branch. This path asks him to honor mountains, rivers, and local spirits through proper rites, drawing their power into himself little by little instead of forcing some violent breakthrough. There is no Dantian drama here at all. The book treats the human body itself as a small heaven and earth, able to contain these powers without the cultivation cliches Lychee expected. The more properly he cultivates, the more earth deities he can approach and the stronger the techniques he can use, all in a calm, gradual progression with no obvious bottleneck. That peaceful system leaves Lychee almost disbelieving, because it sounds nothing like the brutal, resource-hungry cultivation stories he thought he knew. Still, the book makes clear that all methods have ranks, and because every tradition uses different names for power levels, the sages imposed one shared ladder from 9th rank to 1st rank. While Lychee is still sorting through the inheritance in his head, Mr. Zhu pulls him back to the street and says everything worth learning for now is already inside it. Then Mr. Zhu finishes the explanation and casually says he will introduce Lychee to someone, correcting himself with a dry smile. Not someone, but a demon. Mr. Zhu abruptly pulls Shinshubi out from behind him, and the rabbit demon freezes when she recognizes Lychee standing there. Her eyes redden with anger as Shinshubi realizes the shamans had a second layer to their trap and thinks she should never have trusted that earlier meeting. Even while cornered, Shinshubi forces herself to think that Wushan Mountain probably needs her alive, but she still decides she cannot trust them again. She plants herself in front of the 2 men and glares, determined to protect Lady Luofu's interests no matter what they claim. Lychee ignores her hostility, and immediately bows to Mr. Zhu, asking if his mission is to follow Shinshubi and deliver the message to Lady Luofu. Mr. Zhu confirms it, and says he cannot personally approach Lady Luofu because someone in her position should not be startled. Shinshubi instantly snaps back that Lady Luofu is not some frightened bird, but Mr. Zhu cannot even be bothered to answer her. Instead, Mr. Zhu turns his attention to Lychee, finding his quiet caution much more interesting than Shinshubi's blunt outrage. When Mr. Zhu calls his name, Lychee instantly switches from playing dead to obedient student and answers with sharp, almost startling quickness. Mr. Zhu tests him directly, asking what major event around Great Lu Lychee has inferred besides the clues already discussed, and promises a reward for a correct answer. Lychee realizes this is another test, so he starts sorting through what kind of great event would leave signs obvious enough for a commoner like him to notice. He narrows the possibilities to the 2 biggest affairs of a state, sacrifice or war, and quickly rules out sacrifice as too small and too unrelated to his own experience. Once only war remains, Lychee remembers Lu Shan bragging that he deserted the Song Kingdom while Tang was attacking it, and the answer clicks into place. Lychee answers that Mr. Zhu must mean the war between the Tang dynasty and the Song Kingdom. Mr. Zhu is pleased and says that with this much brains, Lychee is less likely to get himself killed on the road to Lady Luofu. Then Mr. Zhu presses further, asking why he targeted the Strong Force gang in the first place. Lychee guesses that Mr. Zhu targeted the Strong Force gang from the start because he meant to use Lu Shan as a ritual offering. Mr. Zhu immediately corrects him, saying sacrifice is a sacred word and a deserter like Lu Shan is nowhere near worthy of it. Still, Mr. Zhu admits Lychee grasps the point. Lu Shan was a disposable deserter he could execute after using him to lure out the outsiders he wanted. Lychee lowers his head even more, finally understanding that Mr. Zhu can call himself kind and still kill people without hesitation. Satisfied with the test, Mr. Zhu takes a willow branch from his sleeve and offers it as both reward and parting gift for the journey. Lychee does not dare question the gift, so he accepts the willow branch with thanks and quietly returns to his safest posture of saying as little as possible. Mr. Zhu says Lychee has passed every test, places the mission in his hands, and pats him on the shoulder before vanishing on the spot. That leaves Li Qi and Shinshubi alone in the street, staring at each other in baffled silence after being dumped together without any proper handoff. Li Qi inwardly complains that this new boss seems wildly irresponsible, and starts wondering if he might not even be the only messenger sent after Lady Luofu. Shinshubi is just as stunned, her earlier hostility briefly buried under pure confusion that the big shaman really left her alone with the little one. Her mind races through every bad rumor she has heard about Wushan Mountain shamans, from scheming diviners to outright lunatics. Li Qi recovers first and steps in politely, reminding Shinshubi that they already met earlier that day. Shinshubi fires back that of course she remembers him as the little shaman who came sneaking around to capture her. As Shinshubi sizes him up, Li Qi's sun-darkened skin, rough hands, and ragged hemp clothes make him look exactly like a hard-used man from the lower ranks. For one moment she almost feels sorry for him, but then she remembers his sharp talk with Mr. Zhu and decides that honest-looking face is just camouflage for a sly mind. Li Qi catches the inspection and immediately turns righteous, insisting their first meeting was chance and that he rescued her instead of capturing her. Shinshubi protests that right after he appeared, Mr. Zhu showed up and seized her, so how could she not blame him? Li Qi smoothly lowers himself to her level, saying he is just as confused as she is because a lowly subordinate cannot possibly know what a great shaman intends. Before she can settle on an answer, Li Qi pivots and claims this might not be a bad thing at all. Shinshubi snaps that Wushan Mountain clearly has designs on Lady Luofu, and that alone makes this dangerous. Li Qi uses that opening to say Wushan Mountain and Lady Luofu share the same enemy, the Tang dynasty, so cooperation is the real reason they want contact. The moment he mentions Lady Luofu being hunted by Tang, Shinshubi's anger gives way to obvious pain. Seeing that opening, Li Qi pushes harder and paints his own role as proof of goodwill. A weak outsider messenger who cannot threaten or magically expose Lady Luofu. Li Qi piles up one reassuring excuse after another, and the simple rabbit demon who only wants to protect Lady Luofu starts to look genuinely half-convinced. Just as she starts wavering, Li Qi pulls out Mr. Zhu's willow branch and asks her to explain what it is, handing her a chance to feel knowledgeable instead of cornered. The trick works, and Shinshubi begins explaining that the branch carries Earth deity divine power for warding off evil, binding targets, and striking ghosts and wicked things. She keeps going, proudly citing old lore about willow branches driving away ghosts, and even brings up the famous willow in the jade pure bottle. By the end of it, she casually concludes the branch could probably even kill people, though in her eyes it is still nowhere near worthy of Lady Luofu's things. Li Qi sincerely praises her knowledge, and after everything she has been through, that one honest compliment lands perfectly. Shinshubi puffs up with pride, finally enjoying a little recognition instead of fear and suspicion. With her guard lowered, Li Qi smoothly suggests they find a place to rest and asks her to keep teaching him on the road ahead. Shinshubi agrees almost automatically, not realizing that the girl who refused to travel with Li Qi has already been talked right into doing exactly that. Left alone with Shinshubi, Li Qi quickly realizes his money is nowhere near enough for traveling with a silk-dressed young woman who looks rich and easy to rob. To calm her down and take control of the situation, Li Qi casually introduces himself and draws Shinshubi into a more normal conversation. When Shinshubi simply gives her name back, Li Qi is struck again by how book-smart yet oddly innocent this demon girl really is. Li Qi leads her to the riverside and decides that if they are traveling together, he needs to keep her talking and learn who she is. He starts with himself, giving the harmless version of his life as a boat hauler and skipping everything he cannot possibly explain. As he talks about hauling boats, rough dock life, and strange things seen on the water, Shinshubi gets completely absorbed and treats him like a storyteller. Li Qi even explains how people in Baiwa often seek out shamans instead of physicians when sickness strikes. Shinshubi suddenly answers with a long, polished quotation from a scholar's book, explaining Baiwa healing customs in detail and proving she has read far more than Li Qi expected. She goes on to repeat the scholar's criticism too: shamans may cure a case, but physicians can trace causes and stop whole outbreaks before they spread. Li Qi can only stare, wondering how someone this well-read still seems to be missing a basic link in her thinking. He agrees with her point and backs it up with his own experience, remembering how a shaman cured his parasite sickness without teaching him how to avoid it happening again. Pleased to be agreed with, Shinshubi gives a proud little hum, and just like that her earlier resentment is almost gone. Seeing how easily the conversation worked, Li Qi smoothly pushes further and asks the real question: how did she end up in Great Lu at all? Shinshubi answers plainly that she is Lady Luofu's rabbit, raised at her side for about 100 years, learning and cultivating whenever her lady did. She explains that when Lady Luofu was being hunted, her mistress left her behind in Great Lu to keep her from being killed in the pursuit. But the enemy still tagged her with a spell hidden in her defensive chi, one that fed on her cultivation and exposed her location. She adds that because Wei Qi and Ying Qi circulate through the whole body, there was no easy way to cut the spell out once it was buried inside her. Li Qi only catches the important part: Shinshubi destroyed her own cultivation to survive, which finally explains why she is so weak now. When she sees his blank face, Shinshubi launches into an even more formal explanation, citing medical classics line by line to define Wei Qi and Ying Qi. Her point is blunt. Even doctors and Taoists do not fully understand that circulation, so once the pursuers planted their mark there, self-destruction was her only answer. She says she wiped out both kinds of qi and rebuilt her circulation from scratch because she was terrified the enemy would use her to trace Lady Luofu. Then Shinshubi abruptly remembers she was captured by Wushan Mountain in the middle of all this, and the mood snaps back toward danger. Li Qi reacts instantly and flips the argument, insisting that Lady Luofu would actually be safer with Wushan Mountain than with the Tang pursuers. He presses the logic harder, saying that if they find Lady Luofu first, Wushan Mountain can shelter her where the Tang dynasty cannot reach. Shinshubi actually pauses to consider it, and to Li Qi's relief, the argument starts to sound reasonable even to her. Li Qi keeps feeding that idea to her until, by moonrise, she finally agrees to travel with him and search for Lady Luofu. That same agreement brings Li Qi an immediate bonus. Once Shinshubi sees he has nowhere proper to stay, she takes him back to the inn with her. For a man used to docks and open ground, Li Qi's first reel and stay feels almost absurdly comfortable. Before dawn the next morning, Li Qi wakes in the dark not to leave early, but because Mr. Zhu's cultivation method demands practice at this exact hour. Inside his mind, the inheritance called Zhu still behaves like a literal book, not a magical memory, so anything he wants he has to open and study the hard way. The good news is that the core method itself is short: gather different qi from heaven and earth, build a little world inside the body, nurture the spirit there, and sacrifice to oneself. Li Qi also learns again that ritual priest cultivation splits into 3 paths, and because of Mr. Zhu he has already entered the earth deity branch. For this season, the method says he must first offer to a heaven spirit, the eastern azure dragon that rises with spring. The spring star signs and farming calendar finally make sense to him as one thing. When the dragon raises its head, that is the moment to draw in the qi of the east. That is why Li Qi drags himself out of his warm bed in the middle of the night with almost painful determination, because cultivation matters more than sleep now. He treats the moment with real urgency too, because to him this is the path out of a boat hauler's life and into something higher. Li Qi sets up the rite and begins his first proper sacrifice to the azure dragon, starting the heaven spirit portion of his daily cultivation. When that part finishes, Li Qi knows he still has to continue with the earth deity right before the day's cultivation is truly complete. Even so, the progress in front of him is enough to make him breathe easier, because he can finally see himself stepping into the ranks of cultivators. But right at that hopeful moment, Li Qi notices something unsettling. For all the progress bars he sees everywhere, one person never had one at all: Mr. Zhu. Li Qi briefly wonders if a progress bar can actually fail when the target is too strong, but he forces himself to drop the distraction and focus on one thing that matters now: cultivation. Following the Zhu text, he starts a spring heaven spirit sacrifice by mixing ash and water and tracing a winding path from outside the door into the room to guide the dragon back. He grabs dried plants, lights them, and waves the smoke through the room as the next step, fumigating insects the way the rite demands. The full ritual is supposed to include more elaborate offerings, but with no stir-fried beans on hand, Li Qi awkwardly substitutes rice cakes and pushes through anyway. After nearly half an hour of work, the sacrifice finally answers him, and a stream of qi descends from the eastern rising dragon into his body. He cannot fully name the power yet, but the effect is immediate. He feels stronger, more alive, and suddenly overflowing with spring vitality. The great forest which he wipes away his fatigue and even patches the emptiness left by bull strength art, like his dried-up inner world has finally caught rain. In that moment, Li Qi realizes he has truly stepped onto the cultivation path at last, entering the ritual priest road of the shamanic way through the earth deity branch. Once qi enters his body, even the world looks different, and Li Qi starts sensing that heaven, earth, humans, demons, and gods all carry different kinds of qi. Using the Zhu text as a guide, he struggles through the theory and grasps the key point: all things are born from qi, and learning to tell those qi apart is how this path understands the world. He learns he can attach qi to his eyes to keep watching these flows directly, and for a beginner like him the cost is manageable for about an hour. He turns that vision on the sleeping Shinshubi and confirms her story looks true. The qi on her body is weak and freshly formed, like someone rebuilding from scratch after ruining her old cultivation. Li Qi tests bull strength art again and finds a major change. Now it lasts until his own qi runs out instead of ending after 10 minutes. The 3 uses a day limit still stays, and Li Qi dryly concludes that the earth deity Qiong is just too willful to keep lending out power forever. He also senses how the spell works now, catching the faint transmission of earth deity divine qi from the void when bull strength art activates. That borrowed divine qi still gives him thickened skin, blazing yang, and the strength of 10 men, but now the wood qi makes the technique far steadier and less exhausting. Satisfied with the first success, Li Qi moves straight into a second round of cultivation and prepares an earth deity sacrifice for spring. The text explains that spring belongs to the household gate among the 5 household deities, so this season's proper earth deity offering is for the gods of entry and emergence. That leads him to the household gods Shinto and Yulei, 2 ghost-binding brothers whose job was to seize harmful spirits and feed them to tigers. The old record even says the Yellow Emperor taught people to hang their images at household gates, which is why they became the classic guardians against evil. The familiar names and even the Tang dynasty reference unsettle him for a second, but Li Qi shuts that line of thought down too and decides to live in this world as it is. For this sacrifice, he tries something smarter and places Mr. Zhu's willow branch on the altar as the offering vessel. The rite works, and a new wisp of divine qi sinks into the branch itself, making it brighter and sharpening its power against ghosts. Li Qi is pleased to learn the upgraded branch now works even better as anti-ghost equipment, which is exactly the kind of practical improvement he needs. He deliberately skips the human ghost side of worship, because as an outsider in this world he has no ancestral line here to offer to. By the time he finishes, the sun is already up, but instead of feeling wrecked from rising at 3 in the morning, the witchy leaves him fresh and alert. Shinshubi, meanwhile, is still sleeping soundly through all of this, oddly relaxed for a wanted fugitive worth 100 gold. Li Qi can only shake his head at her single-minded calm, decides to let her keep sleeping, and notes that at least Mr. Zhu already paid for the room. After shutting off Bull's strength art, he steps outside and starts wondering where his new cultivation actually places him in the world's rank system. By Wushan Mountain standards, he knows he is barely even a proper initiate yet, because he still needs the book for simple rites and spent 3 whole hours on 2 basic sacrifices. So he turns to the sage's shared 9th to 1st ranking ladder, the system meant to standardize every cultivation path under one scale. That phrase about standardizing the world sounds grand enough to make him skeptical, but he suspects it reflects a very real struggle over the Tao, not just empty naming. The key rule is that rank measures influence over the Tao and understanding of it, not raw fighting strength, which is why different paths compare so awkwardly. A lower rank martial cultivator might beat a higher rank diviner head-on, yet that same diviner could still kill from the shadows with curses or calculations, which proves rank and combat are not the same thing. Even so, high ranks still matter, because every path eventually develops unique abilities that make its masters powerful in ways raw destruction cannot measure. He sorts the system into broad tiers. 7 to 9 are beginners, 4 to 6 are real experts, and the top 3 are the kind of figures who run sects and major powers. The Zhu text also says the highest known exemplars of the great paths are things like shaman gods, true immortals, sages, and human immortals, and even first rank may not be the absolute end. After checking his situation again and again, Li Qi lands on a humbling answer. He is not even 9th rank yet, just plain unranked. To even count as 9th rank, he would need a full year of steady seasonal sacrifices, the qi of all 4 seasons in his miniature world, and the 5 household deities protecting his body. Li Qi can only sigh that the road is long and hard, because even entering the formal ranks will take a year of disciplined work. In the morning, Li Qi skips breakfast and wanders Feng County to test the qi sight he just learned. With that strange vision open, he sees water qi running through the river and dragging the city's yin qi away with it. He looks at beggars on the street and realizes sick people carry another muddled kind of qi he can only guess is illness qi. But the deeper he looks, the more he sees that every person is packed with mixed qi he still can't sort apart. Li Qi starts to grasp the scale of it all. Qi seems to be the world's basic substance, but the Zhu inheritance only teaches how to use it, not its ultimate laws. He keeps reading the Zhu text in his head as he walks, treating it like the foundation of his whole future. Then he checks his reading progress and goes numb when 5 hours of effort still have not even pushed the Zhu text past 0%. The absurdly tiny progress makes him realize the inherited knowledge is so huge it may take him more than a year just to read through it. By the time the sun is fully up, Feng County suddenly comes alive all at once. Under qi sight, that ordinary morning turns into a terrifying spectacle as the whole city erupts with a single vast pressure of human qi. Li Qi is shaken to the core because this city's qi dwarfs the stars above and even presses down the power of local earth deities. Watching laws, order, and countless lives fuse into one force, he finally understands that a city is not just buildings but a vessel that holds people. He blurts out the answer almost in a stammer. This overwhelming force is the human Tao. As a shamanistic ritual priest, he feels just how overwhelming the human Tao really is, and this is only a county town of 200,000 people. That thought sends his mind racing to even bigger places like Li Prefecture and the Tang capital, where the human Tao must be beyond imagination. When he wipes the azure dragon qi from his eyes, the miracle vanishes and the city looks normal again, but his heart is still pounding. Now he cannot stop thinking about the scale of cultivation itself, from the 9-rank system to the invisible laws that hold the whole dynasty together. He starts yearning for Li Prefecture's river opening ceremony again, because even an ordinary county market at dawn now feels spectacular to him. That all hardens into a simple, burning desire. Li Qi wants to cultivate not for power or status, but because he wants to see more of the Tao. He imagines climbing all the way to the peak just to witness the full shape of the world beyond him. Then he reins himself back in and admits the truth. Right now he is still an unranked beginner who has to follow the book step by step. Since daily cultivation can only be done once, he decides the fastest way forward is to keep studying and cling tightly to strong backers like Mr. Zhu. He also fixes on one urgent plan: leave soon, find Lady Luofu early, and maybe win more benefits from that connection too. Later, in a shabby roadside tavern, Bakui throws back a cup of rice wine and celebrates in loud relief. Lychee barely cares about the weak wine because after days of plain food, even cheap pickled radish and meat taste amazing to him. While they eat, Lychee asks what business is taking Bakui to Lianxia. Bakui says he is hauling supposed gemstones, but he laughs off the story because each chunk is so heavy that it sounds nothing like real treasure. Then Bakui turns the question around and asks why Lychee is traveling alone with just one bundle. Lychee gives him a cleaned-up version of the truth, saying he killed a local bully who tried to seize his family property and had to flee. Instead of being alarmed, Bakui loves the story and praises Lychee for stabbing back against someone overbearing. As Bakui drinks and boasts, he flashes the utility knife at his waist, and Lychee's sight suddenly screams danger. The knife's edge is so sharp and vicious that Lychee feels as if the blade is already grazing his face. Trying to stay casual, Lychee asks about the knife and learns Bakui uses it for everything from butchering animals to chopping wood. Bakui leans in with a darker grin and admits the knife has tasted plenty of human blood too. He even says a hometown shamanist called it a blade full of malevolent chi that ghosts would fear. That explanation gives Lychee a useful clue. Malevolent chi seems to come from repeated killing, not from formal sacrifice or cultivation. He quietly files that away as another possible way to strengthen himself later. After the meal, both men are full but not drunk, and their rough little feast comes to an easy end. Bakui pays the bill, shoulders his load, and parts with Lychee in the straightforward way of a man who already counts him as a friend. Once Bakui is gone, Lychee heads back toward the inn, and each step gets faster as his next plan locks in. By noon he is nearly running, sure that Shinshubi should be awake and that it is finally time to set out. His goal is now clear and hungry: find Lady Luofu, earn whatever extra benefits he can, and grab the new techniques and power he needs to rise. As the road trip begins, Lychee weighs his coin pouch and feels the sting of reality. After gearing up for the journey, only 231 coins are left. He still forced himself to buy proper supplies, packing food, tools, medicine, fire starters, tarp, and a few cheap trade goods so he could survive the wild and maybe earn some money on the way. He even spent 60 coins to replace Shinshubi's eye-catching old outfit with a plain hemp dress, hoping she would stop looking like a rich target on the road. The disguise only goes so far, because even in rough clothes Shinshubi still looks far too delicate and beautiful to pass as an ordinary village girl. Lychee decides that doesn't matter anymore, because after everything he has seen and learned, he no longer thinks of himself as just an ordinary gang laborer either. At the start of the trip, Lychee asks the obvious question: how is Shinshubi even supposed to find Lady Luofu with no map and no destination? Shinshubi answers with absolute confidence that she can simply feel Lady Luofu's direction and just has to keep following that pull. Lychee finds that answer dangerously vague, but in a world full of demons and gods, he has no better plan, so he follows her anyway. So the two of them set off into the empty mountains with no itinerary at all, Lychee carrying everything while Shinshubi strolls along with empty hands like this is a casual outing. After 2 days, Lychee realizes she really is absurdly low maintenance, because dust will not stick to Shinshubi no matter where they walk. Even when she stumbles in the dirt, Shinshubi climbs back up clean and unruffled except for an annoyed face, which only makes Lychee feel weirder about what she is. Then Lychee learns the bigger difference. Shinshubi does not need ordinary food at all and says she lives by absorbing chi instead. No food, no sweat, no bathing, no fatigue, and barely even a need to breathe. To Lychee, traveling with her starts to feel almost unfairly convenient. 3 days into the trek, they stop at noon in the wilderness so Lychee can finally rest, cook, and get some strength back. By now they are less awkward around each other, but Shinshubi still stays mostly quiet while Lychee is the one who keeps trying to make conversation on the road. While Lychee goes to fetch water and handle lunch, Shinshubi quietly checks her sense of Lady Luofu and realizes something she has not told him. Even after 3 hard days and more than 200 li, Shinshubi can barely feel the distance to Lady Luofu shrinking at all. She keeps that to herself, because she fears Lychee would give up if he knew this road could take half a year or even a full year on foot. All she can do is sigh and wish for a horse, because riding would change everything and Lychee is far too poor to buy one himself. Then her ears catch something impossible, and she suddenly snaps upright at the sound of a horse somewhere ahead. At the camp, Lychee is scraping mold off damp rice cakes and boiling the salvaged pieces, because on the road even half-spoiled food still has to count as lunch. He has at least found one tiny luxury in all this hardship. By watching a floating cooking progress bar, he can control the fire well enough to make even plain rice cakes come out properly. While the food cooks, he also keeps reading the Zhu in his mind, slowly pushing through the massive inheritance one relentless day at a time. After 3 straight days of this routine, his reading progress has only reached 0.6%, but that tiny number still feels like proof he can eventually master it. His cultivation is growing too. 4 strands of great forest with chi and 3 strands of earth deity chi now circulate through his body, and he can feel himself becoming much stronger than before. Then Shinshubi suddenly breaks her usual silence and calls for him in real excitement, which instantly tells Lychee something important has changed. Lychee hurries over, half expecting some clue about Lady Luofu, and finds Shinshubi almost too excited to get the words out. What she has found is not Lady Luofu at all. She has heard a horse ahead, and to her that sounds like a miracle. Li Qi is confused because he cannot hear anything, and Shinshubi immediately reveals the reason by popping up a pair of white rabbit ears. She beams at the possibility of riding instead of walking, but Li Qi's excitement dies fast because horses in this world are dangerous beasts, not gentle farm animals. He remembers the spiritual horses owned by powerful people and knows even now he might barely be able to fight one, let alone catch one. Shinshubi brushes that worry aside and insists she does not need to catch the horse at all. She can simply talk to it and ask for help. That sounds ridiculous, but she is a demon and Li Qi has already seen enough impossible things from her to believe it might actually work. So he makes the decision immediately. If there is even a chance at a horse, they have to try. Li Qi quickly hides the back basket, leaves the unfinished rice cakes and pot where they are, and stamps out the fire so they can run light. Because Shinshubi has lost her cultivation and cannot keep up physically, Li Qi throws her onto his back and takes off at full speed. He burns one precious strand of great forest wood chi to do it, flooding his body with spring vitality so he can run far faster and longer than a normal man. Branches and rocks slash at him as he barrels off the trail, but under the wood chi those small cuts start closing almost as soon as they appear. He drives straight through the mountain at the shortest angle possible, climbing and leaping instead of following the path, desperate to reach the horse before it disappears. As they close in, Shinshubi listens again and her expression changes. The horse is not fleeing at all. It sounds like it is crying and coming toward them. Li Qi freezes at that strange warning, and a moment later he hears the horse's voice for himself. A horse cries out somewhere deep in the mountains, but the sound is so human with pain that even Li Qi can tell this is no ordinary beast. Shinshubi says the horse has already gained sentience and starts calling him he, which means they might be able to talk to him. Li Qi immediately decides to rush over faster, hoping mutual understanding will turn this cry for help into a real meeting. He tears across ravines, streams, cliffs, and thickets for half an hour, and all the while Li Qi is quietly stunned that Shinshubi heard a horse from more than 10 li away. At last they spot the horse in a ravine, and from a distance alone Li Qi can see he is both powerful and in terrible shape. The closer Li Qi looks, the worse it gets. The giant horse is shod like a ridden mount, yet he is skeletal, covered in wounds, and still running with white worms in his flesh. Shinshubi urges Li Qi to help him, and Li Qi agrees at once because saving the horse and earning a ride is a perfect piece of mutual aid. Shinshubi waves the horse over without hesitation, completely sure that something this tall and spiritual will understand human speech. When Li Qi asks why she is so confident, Shinshubi launches into a breathless lesson that horses this grand are basically dragon steeds in ancient texts. She keeps stacking examples from old books about dragons and horses sharing the same nature, while Li Qi can only marvel that this silly rabbit spirit somehow remembers all of it. Shinshubi finally guesses the real reason the horse is coming. Li Qi carries Spring Azure Dragon Divine Qi, and a dying dragon-blooded mount would naturally chase that life force. Hair pulling aside, Li Qi gets a full look at the horse and realizes this old creature has been surviving in a state that should have killed him long ago. Shinshubi turns serious, and says his problem is not just injury but hostile qi inside his body that keeps him from healing. Li Qi pours great forest wood qi into his eyes and sees three things at once: a tiny trace of dragon qi, a sharp red stain in the thigh wound, and the answer he feared. That red aura feels just like the power on Bakuei's blade, and Li Qi realizes the horse has been wounded by malevolent qi. Shinshubi confirms it in the next breath. Malevolent qi and death qi are both eating away at him, which is why his wounds never closed. The old horse finally reaches them, but the effort is too much and he collapses before he can even stop properly. Shinshubi jumps down at once and starts soothing him, and Li Qi gets a fresh reminder that her body is so unnaturally pure that dirt, blood, and filth cannot cling to her at all. As she runs her hand through his mane, the impossible happens and the knotted filth loosens on its own, making Li Qi wonder just how powerful she used to be. Li Qi is struck again by the gap between Shinshubi's gentle nature and the strength she must once have had, even while privately wondering if crippling her cultivation scrambled her brain a little. Shinshubi tells Li Qi to fetch the luggage and medicine while she keeps treating the horse where he lies. She whispers to the old horse, and after that quiet exchange he forces himself back onto his feet to go with her to the stream. Before Li Qi leaves, the horse walks to him and gives a weak greeting, and Li Qi answers like they already understand each other well enough to start a deal. Li Qi sends the two of them down to wash the wounds in the river and heads back alone to recover the hidden pack. Back at the stash, Li Qi finds his meal half cold and ruined, but he still gulps it down because there is no room for fussing out here. He shoulders the backpack and starts back, but this time he refuses to spend another strand of wood chi because only 3 are left. Without chi to boost him, the return trip drags into an exhausting hour of climbing and sweat before he reaches the ravine again. When Li Qi finally looks down at the stream, he sees that Shinshubi has almost finished and the horse has changed from a filthy wreck into a frail but noble old steed. Now that the grime is gone, Li Qi can see the truth clearly. This giant old horse is majestic, wise-eyed, and annoyingly handsome. Li Qi even gets briefly irritated that a horse looks better than he does. then drops the thought because arguing with a horse would be ridiculous. Shinshubi runs up happily to announce she already spoke with him, and the new arrangement is simple. They heal him, and he carries them on the road. For Li Qi, that deal is incredible because a journey that might have taken them a year and a half could now shrink to half a month. Li Qi accepts the partnership on the spot, pulls out the medicine, and casually names him Old Horse since he still does not know the steed's real name. The horse proves again that he understands everything by obediently walking over and turning his wounded side toward Li Qi for treatment. As Li Qi applies the medicine, the old stallion keeps nuzzling him with open affection, which would be touching if Li Qi were not so alarmed by how rough and male this horse is. Shinshubi translates the horse's request at last. He wants Li Qi to lend him one strand of Azure Dragon Divine Qi. That confirms Shinshubi's earlier guess that the horse really did come chasing Li Qi's Azure Dragon vitality. The horse presses his face close again and promises, through Shinshubi, that this too is mutual aid and he will repay Li Qi for saving his life. Li Qi brushes off the idea of repayment because carrying them fast is already enough, and he decides he can spare the Qi anyway since Spring will give him another strand tomorrow. 2 days after joining Li Qi's group, the old horse is still dragging his feet, exhausted from taking in Li Qi's Azure Dragon Wood Qi. Li Qi fears the old horse might simply collapse and die, but Shinshubi calmly tells him the horse is using that new Qi to grind away the malevolent Qi inside his body. Shinshubi starts quoting medical theory at him, explaining how Qi and blood circulate through the body in ordered paths like a miniature heaven and earth. Li Qi understands almost none of it at first, but he forces himself to memorize her explanation and slowly pieces together the basics. Once he follows her logic, Li Qi realizes the horse's wood Qi is pushing his own body to clear out the lingering corruption before it rots him from the inside. Shinshubi adds that the old horse's condition is the kind where hidden pus clings to the bone, and if it is not treated quickly, death can come within 30 days. She goes on in that same bookish tone, describing Li Qi's Spring Azure Dragon Wood Qi as living spring vitality that can help strip away the malevolent Qi. Li Qi finally translates all that grand theory into plain sense. The old horse is basically fighting off an internal infection with his own boosted vitality. With that, Li Qi stops panicking and accepts that the fever, weakness, and dizziness are part of the horse recovering. He climbs a hill to scout the area and finally spots signs of a village, giving the group a real chance to resupply and treat the horse properly. Li Qi decides to trade away his spare goods for supplies, because the old horse is too weak to carry anyone and too underfed to keep recovering on grass alone. Shinshubi warns that this poor diet will slow the horse's recovery, so Li Qi starts thinking in practical terms about beans, eggs, and anything else that can build him back up. The old horse clearly understands what they are doing for him, and through Shinshubi's repeated translations, he keeps thanking them along the road. Li Qi can only call it mutual aid, then gives the old horse another fresh strand of great forest wood Qi to help him last until they reach safety. By the second day, they finally reach the village, and Li Qi immediately notices the thick log wall guarding it. The thick log wall instantly tells Li Qi this remote village can defend itself, so he approaches it with caution instead of treating it like an easy stop. He calls out from outside the gate, loudly pitching himself as a traveling merchant with salt, cloth, and iron farm tools to trade. Someone from the village challenges why he dares travel alone, and Li Qi confidently points to the old horse as the reason he can outrun danger on the road. He adds that the horse is injured and he only wants 1 day of rest and some food, making his story sound practical instead of threatening. After weighing his trade goods, the weak horse, and the fact that he is traveling with a woman, the villagers decide this lone traveler looks safe enough to admit. Inside, the village looks ordinary at first glance, but Li Qi spots its only ox and immediately suspects even that beast is stronger than any normal animal from his old world. Thinking of his bull strength heart, Li Qi mentally compares the ox to a small tank and is reminded again that this world has no truly ordinary livestock. Li Qi sets up to trade, while Shinshubi shrinks back against the old horse and tries to hide from the villagers instead of helping. Li Qi finds her reaction oddly shy, then realizes she was probably like this from the start, and only stopped showing it once she got used to him. At least with the old horse beside her, no ordinary villager is likely to casually bother Shinshubi. Instead of buying mountain goods to resell later, Li Qi tells the villagers he wants beans and dried meat for the road right now. The villagers are confused, because merchants usually want profitable goods, so Li Qi explains that he is really just trying to gather provisions. Once they decide he is more of a traveler than a real merchant, the villagers loosen up and start offering what food they can spare. Li Qi promises to price everything fairly by value, and that practical honesty helps him win their trust. When they ask again why he wants beans so badly, Li Qi admits it is for his sick horse, and the villagers are shocked that the animal is eating better than the man. Li Qi cracks that beans make the horse run fast but only make him fart, and that joke finally gets the whole crowd laughing with him. By the end of the trading, Li Qi has swapped away his spare salt, tools, cloth, wok, and some medicine for heavy bags of beans, roots, a little meat, and a few mountain goods. One farmer's wife begs for medicine for someone sick at home, and Li Qi softens enough to trade for mushrooms and wood ear instead of the beans he actually came for. She gives him extra out of gratitude, and Li Qi accepts the small windfall as road food he can trust more than any wild mushrooms he might forage himself. The dried meat costs dearly, but Li Qi pays anyway, because the old horse needs real nourishment more than he needs extra tools. Even after trading, Li Qi does not just leave, because he spots villagers struggling with a giant stone in the fields and steps in to help. He immediately takes charge like an experienced hauler, correcting their posture and showing them how to put their weight into the pull. With Li Qi directing the rhythm and the village ox joining the effort, the massive stone finally tears free from the earth. After helping in the fields, Li Qi heads back sweaty and loaded down with supplies, and the villagers now greet him like a familiar little brother. Meanwhile, Shinshubi and the old horse have barely moved at all, still pressed against the wall like they have been hiding from the whole village for hours. Li Qi returns at last and jokes about the two of them hiding there, expecting at most another bout of Shinshubi's shyness. Instead, Shinshubi rushes to grab his sleeve the moment he comes close, clearly rattled and desperate to leave right now. When Li Qi asks what is wrong, Shinshubi says she has a bad premonition and insists something terrible is about to happen. When Shinshubi warns that a bad premonition suddenly hit her, Li Qi immediately asks how trustworthy that feeling is. Shinshubi admits her warning is only a feeling, but she used to be a crippled 5th rank cultivator, so Li Qi knows he cannot brush it off. The rank revelation rattles Li Qi so badly that his disbelief turns into a grim private vow to reach that level himself one day. Li Qi decides not to gamble on the night, even though he worked all day to secure a safe stay in the village, and orders an immediate departure. Old Horse does not hesitate either, and Shinshubi translates that the battered old dragon steed is willing to carry their load and run. Li Qi accepts and tells Old Horse to carry them roughly 200 li away before resting somewhere hidden near water. Old Horse crouches so they can mount, with Li Qi taking the front and Shinshubi forced to cling behind him because she is too weak to ride steadily alone. The moment they set off, Li Qi realizes Old Horse may be wounded and aged, but as a dragon steed he still moves almost like he is flying. The cloud mist softens the ride so much that Li Qi can only stare, amazed, as Old Horse glides over ravines ordinary mounts could never cross. Before full dark, they have already covered more than 180 li and stop beside a secluded mountain pond. Once they stop, Old Horse is left panting, overheated, and drenched in sweat from pushing his old injured body that hard. Li Qi quickly cools Old Horse with pond water, treating him less like baggage and more like a comrade who just saved them. He even mixes beans, water, and coarse salt into the pot for Old Horse, while grumbling that the horse had better not slobber in the same pot he still uses himself. With Old Horse recovering, Li Qi turns back to the real problem and cautiously asks Shinshubi whether that bad feeling is still there. Shinshubi says the premonition has weakened a lot, so Li Qi is relieved enough to stay put, but not enough to feel truly safe. Since the night is settling in, Li Qi plans to cook, eat, and use the quiet time to keep reading the Zhu in his mind. Remembering the Zhu's section on reading Cloud Chi, Li Qi starts testing that ritual knowledge against the real sky above the mountains. At first he sees nothing unusual, and the gap between the book's grand claims and his own eyes makes him doubt his method. So Li Qi switches to Chi sight, pouring great forest with Chi into his eyes to look at the world properly. The mountain range instantly changes in his vision, revealing tangled heaven and earth Chi and a shocking amount of miasma and poisonous vapors he never noticed before. Alarmed, Li Qi checks his own body and discovers that several kinds of internal Chi are forming a barrier that keeps most of that poison outside him. That discovery teaches him something else too: poison and miasma are blocked, but cold Chi and heat Chi still slip through, which may be why people feel cold, fever, and sickness at all. He turns that same sight on Shinshubi and realizes she is far stranger than he thought. Under Chi sight, Shinshubi looks like an isolated island, with heat, cold, poison, and miasma all shut out as if the world itself cannot touch her. Even in the deeper gloom of night, Li Qi keeps testing the limits of that vision and realizes his own outer path ability can see a lot, but not everything. When he looks farther, the setting sun catches a strange cloud over his own head, and the red color matches the Zhu's omen for war and famine. He tries to tell himself it is only ordinary sunset color, but a sudden jolt of alarm hits him so hard that cold sweat breaks out on the spot. Li Qi finally accepts that the danger was never gone, and he shouts for Old Horse and Shinshubi to get moving and help him prepare. While forcing himself to think, Li Qi flips through the Zhu for a way out and latches onto one line about Springborn wood surviving if it moves into a place of flourishing vitality. The story then shifts into the deep primeval forest itself, where the last blood-red sunlight fades over twisted trees, caves, vines, and a valley almost untouched by human feet. Into that demonic beast territory rides a squad of about 10 black-armored soldiers on horseback, led by a stern officer and marked by a pine branch military flag. One black-armored soldier points out this is where the dragon steed was last seen, and the officer coldly says his malevolent Chi halberd strike should have left it badly wounded and nearby. The officer presses a soldier named Zhang Wu about why his divination has stopped working, because something is now obscuring the dragon steed's trail. The soldier explains that a high-level expert can disturb karma and ruin divination, especially someone with an immaculate body that filth, spells, curses, heat, and cold barely affect. The officer dismisses that idea at once, arguing that a 5th-rank Taoist expert would never care about a mere dragon steed when they could ride true dragons. So the soldier offers a second answer. if the dragon steed entered a place with surging chi, like a city full of human vitality, or a graveyard full of death chi, its traces could also vanish. The officer accepts that possibility and orders the squad to keep searching in that direction, confirming the hunters are still closing in. On the mountain path, Shinshubi sags against Old Horse and complains that hauling stones is exhausting now that her cultivation is gone. Lychee keeps climbing with a massive stone on his back and explains that both her instinct and his divination warned of a military disaster, so they need defenses before trouble reaches them. He tells Shinshubi and Old Horse to rest because only he can really fight, but the two of them stubbornly keep helping anyway. When enough stone is gathered, Lychee starts stacking it into a ritual altar because he wants to turn his new ritual knowledge into a real trump card. The rite calls for a pure-colored animal sacrifice, so Lychee walks toward the pure black Old Horse with a knife and nearly scares the poor beast out of its skin. Lychee cannot bring himself to kill Old Horse, so he only takes a little blood and clips a lock of its handsome mane for the offering. He promises Old Horse a strand of Azure Dragon Divine Chi later, and that instantly cheers the horse up. Lychee places the horse blood and mane on the altar, adding the sweet spring water Shinshubi fetched so the sacrifice has every substitute ingredient he can manage. He finishes the altar with a crude stone human figure and faces south to begin the shamanic ceremony. What he is really trying to do is not summon a full mountain god, but force a tiny piece of the mountain spirit into that carved stone. He feeds that fragment with offerings and a strand of his own chi so it briefly gains a human-like awareness the mountain itself was never meant to have. Lychee knows the mountain spirit will reject that contamination, and that rejected piece is exactly what he wants, a strand of mountain root earth chi. Lychee reflects that earth chi shapes whole regions in this world, changing plants, animals, and even local conditions in ways his old world never could explain. That is why he fully believes the Zhu's teaching that a true mountain stands because an even greater hidden mountain root supports it underground. As a ritual priest on the earth deity path, he wants to combine that earth chi with heaven chi and turn the clash of the two into real offensive power. Even though Shinshubi was once strong enough to judge him as harmless, Lychee is determined to use study and planning to build a trump card despite still being effectively unranked. The ritual finally bites back as the mountain spirit senses human defilement, strips away Lychee's chi, and withdraws in cold disgust. For a moment, Lychee feels as if the whole mountain and forest have started rejecting him, but he grimly accepts the risk because the odds of this mountain ever becoming a god are tiny. With the exchange complete, Lychee looks up at the huge 10-ton altar and knows the exhausting preparation was finally worth it. When he checks on the others, Shinshubi is already asleep against Old Horse, and both of his non-human companions are completely worn out. Lychee does not dare relax, so he climbs to a lookout point and keeps watch over the mountain instead of sleeping. While guarding the area, he keeps studying the Zhu and sees his reading progress creep up to 0.8%, proof that steady learning is already saving his life. Before he spots any visible threat, Shinshubi suddenly wakes with her rabbit ears shooting upright in panic. She warns Lychee that many hoofbeats are rushing toward them, at least 10 riders, and Lychee shoots to his feet as his earlier divination proves terrifyingly right. Tracking traces of dragon chi through nearby villages, a black-armored officer realizes the strange merchant with a woman and an old horse has to be the one who took their wounded dragon steed. The officer is even more certain when he hears the supposed merchant was buying plain beans for the horse, because no real owner would feed a dragon steed like common livestock. After finding fresh hoofprints, the squad pushes toward the mountain, and the officer decides to wait for the rest of his men before closing in. The delayed riders finally catch up and present 2 severed heads from the village shamans, while the officer treats the killings as easy merit to be claimed later. With the village wiped out and bonus merit already in hand, the officer drives the squad onward, eager to reclaim the horse and stack even more rewards. At the mountain camp, Lychee bitterly mocks his own uselessness, because he stayed alert all night and noticed nothing while sleeping. Shinshubi heard the pursuers first. Knowing a fight may be coming, Lychee sends Shinshubi away with the old horse and stays behind alone at the foot of the cliff. Lychee still hopes words can save him, but he grimly reminds himself that talk only works if the other side cannot kill him first. A quarter hour later, Lychee finally sees the threat clearly, a full squad of black-armored cavalry, all heavily armed and far worse than the bandits he feared. The red omen Lychee saw earlier suddenly makes horrifying sense, because this was never a small danger at all but a real military disaster. Lychee backs up and clings to one last hope that the soldiers might simply pass by, even though he already knows that hope is flimsy. That illusion dies fast when the squad stops on him, and Lychee spots one rider carrying 2 human heads, proof these men are killers, not travelers. One soldier rides up to question him, and Lychee puts on a trembling act, claiming he is only a merchant camping here for the night. After hearing the report, the officer himself rides forward with a friendly face and asks the real question, did Lychee pick up a horse earlier? Lychee's heart drops, because now he knows for certain they came for the old horse. For a split second Lychee wonders if surrendering the horse could buy his life, but he immediately rejects it, because these are almost certainly the people who wounded it in the first place. Lychee decides he will not betray the old horse, both because he has grown attached to it, and because he still needs it to find Lady Luofu. He tries one last bluff and says he has not seen any horse at all. The officer does not bother arguing and simply raises his crossbow to kill Li Qi on the spot. Because Li Qi was already braced for betrayal, he drops into a tiger crouching stance just as the bolt whistles past and explodes the rock behind him. That one shot tells Li Qi everything. These soldiers are not here to negotiate, only to murder. So Li Qi stops pretending, throws the stone toward the cliff altar above, and commits to the trap he prepared earlier. At the same moment, Bull's strength art surges through him, swelling his body with raw force and exposing him as more than a helpless merchant. The officer instantly recognizes Bull's strength art and shouts that Li Qi is a ritual priest from Wishen Mountain, making the squad treat him as a much bigger threat. Since the rocky slope is bad for charging horses, the soldiers dismount at once and answer with a volley of hand crossbows. Li Qi rolls wildly through the rocks and darkness, barely avoiding the bolts that would have punched straight through his body. When the soldiers abandon reloading and draw blades to rush him, the cliff above finally answers with a thunderous rockfall. Li Qi's flimsy altar collapses exactly as planned, sending tons of stone roaring down the cliff with enough force to smash armored men flat. Instead of retreating, Li Qi charges into the chaos, trusting his timing and the soldiers' panic to create one opening. He slams into one soldier, grabs him outright, and lifts the armored man by brute strength that the squad cannot match in that stunned moment. Li Qi hurls the man into the shadowed ground beneath the rockfall and dives for cover himself before the bigger stones hit. Small rocks clip Li Qi as he escapes, but his great forest which he starts knitting those shallow injuries even while the trap is still falling around him. The armored soldier Li Qi threw is too slow to rise, and the next heavy stones bury him before the others can save him. The officer explodes in rage at losing a man and orders the survivors to kill Li Qi at once. Li Qi does not wait for that second rush and sprints for the mountain pond while the soldiers are still climbing over the fresh rock pile. Reaching the pond, Li Qi throws himself straight into the water as his only path out. The officer reads the terrain at a glance and orders his men to seal the river mouth, knowing the downstream shallows can trap Li Qi between blades and water. 5 soldiers rush to the shallow impact beach and line up with sabers ready, turning the escape route into a killing gate. The rest hurry back for their crossbows and ring the pond, ready to shoot Li Qi the instant he surfaces. To stop Li Qi from hiding underwater long enough to set up another trick, the officer starts stripping off his armor so he can go in after him himself. He warns the men that Li Qi is a real Wishen Mountain ritual priest from the Earth Deity branch, good with mountain and water methods, so they cannot let him keep working below the surface. Even after seeing Li Qi's strength, the officer stays sure of himself, judging Li Qi to be still unranked while he is a 9th-rank military cultivator. At the pond, the officer orders the squad to form up and use military chi to pin down the mountain root and water veins so Li Qi cannot borrow mountain and water power. The soldiers form up, and their weapons flare red as military chi and malevolent chi knit into a terrifying blood-colored formation over their heads. Watching from underwater, Li Qi instantly recognizes a military formation like Lu Shan's, only this one is far stronger and completely beyond him in a head-on clash. Still, Li Qi stays calm because this part is going exactly as planned. In the water, his swimming skill is his real weapon. The officer tells the formation to keep suppressing the terrain, strips off his armor, and dives in himself with a saber to finish Li Qi underwater. Li Qi is secretly pleased when the officer comes down, because surfacing under the crossbows would have gotten him shot to pieces. At the pond bottom, the officer finds Li Qi and advances with a saber whose glowing tip lights the dark water. But the moment the chase starts, the gap in water skill is obvious. The officer fights the pond, while Li Qi glides through it like a fish. When the officer thrusts, Li Qi reads the current from the strike and lets the water itself carry him neatly out of the blade's path. That easy dodge comes from years of pulling boats in dangerous water, where missing a drifting log or rock would have smashed his skull open. Using that advantage, Li Qi slips in close and clamps onto the officer's wrist, planning to crush it with wave-breaking force and his overwhelming strength. Instead of panicking, the officer lets go of the saber, guards his arm, and turns the floating blade itself back on Li Qi with military chi. Then the officer grabs Li Qi in return and pins him in line with the incoming blade, trapping him with the same kind of hold-and-kill tactic Li Qi used on a soldier moments earlier. With the saber closing in, Li Qi burns stamina trying to wrench free, but the officer refuses to let go. In that panic, Li Qi forces out 2 streams of breath while using the bull strength art, blasting bubbles and currents straight into the officer's face. The officer loses his nerve for a split second, and Li Qi finally tears himself loose and flips backward to avoid a killing hit. He barely escapes the thrust, but the blade still nicks him, and that tiny cut immediately turns dangerously wrong. The officer's military chi and malevolent chi numb Li Qi's body, disrupt his circulation, and leave him understanding at last why Old Horse suffered so badly from a single wound. Seeing Li Qi go rigid, the officer trusts his military chi and calmly advances for the finishing blows, because only a dead enemy feels safe. Li Qi really is in terrible shape now. His limbs are cold, his heartbeat is chaotic, and after blasting that bubble attack, he is also running out of air fast. But this danger was one of the risks Li Qi had already considered, because Old Horse survived the same kind of injury with Great Forest would Qi. He also trusts Shinshubi's explanation that in spring, which Qi naturally supports the body's proper circulation, so a stray wisp of malevolent Qi should not be enough to kill him. So Li Qi plays dead, holding still and letting his face turn corpse blue while he waits for the cautious officer to come closer. Even then, the officer stays back and sends the long saber stabbing in by remote control instead of risking a close approach. At the last instant, Li Qi opens his eyes because he has already poured almost all of his great forest which Qi through his body and flushed the malevolent Qi out. That surge does more than save him. It closes his injuries and even sweeps away some hidden problems in his body. Without wasting the opening, Li Qi yanks the willow branch from his waist and finally brings out the weapon he had been saving for a sneak attack. He whips the willow branch around the officer's saber, and the divine Qi inside it shatters the divine soul attached to the blade. The hit is devastating. The officer's soul sense is wrecked, blood bursts from his 7 orifices, and he convulses in the water from the shock. Li Qi does not hesitate for even a heartbeat, and grabs the officer's own saber to stab the incapacitated man again and again. Still not trusting the kill, Li Qi buries the blade into the officer's throat and twists until the man is unquestionably dead. Then Li Qi strips off the scabbard and kicks upward with the corpse, not for glory, but to use the body as a shield when he surfaces. The trick works immediately. The moment Li Qi breaks the surface for air, crossbow bolts slam into the officer's corpse instead of him. The soldiers on shore roar in fury when they realize their little banner officer is dead. Li Qi ignores their grief completely, throws the corpse away, grabs the saber, and races for the river mouth before they can reload. At the river mouth, a few soldiers with bloodshot eyes block the exit with drawn sabers, ready to avenge their commander. Li Qi had already prepared for this last obstacle, so he combines the heaven Qi he stored with a trace of stolen earth Qi and forces them into thunder. The clash of yin and yang erupts into a spring thunder burst that crashes across the water at the soldiers guarding the exit. The thunder is not strong enough to kill trained cultivators outright, but their metal armor and the water under their feet make paralysis instant. Li Qi uses that brief opening to break through the river mouth and vanish downstream before anyone can chase him on foot. Li Qi throws himself into the mountain river at night, trusting the wave-breaking force to save him from pursuers who can fight on land but cannot match him in the water. The soldiers race along the banks and even try to cut him off, but the twisting mountain roads keep ruining their chase. When waterfalls block the way, Li Qi gambles with his life and jumps straight down instead of slowing for a safer route. The riders dare not make the same leap with ordinary spiritual horses, so every detour gives Li Qi another chance to slip into a different branch of the waterways. Deep in Bayua's maze of rivers and mountains, Li Qi finally has the home field advantage, and he treats the whole pursuit like a brutal game of hide and seek. After 4 waterfall drops and a punishing long swim, the hoofbeats fade, and Li Qi finally believes he may have shaken them. He crawls onto the riverbank battered and half dead, only to realize the mountain water's cold Qi has seeped into him and left his whole body shaking numb. The bull strength art is spent, his muscles are twitching uselessly, and Li Qi can do little more than lie there like a dead fish and hope the chase is over. Then a voice answers him in the dark, and one soldier limps into view after somehow forcing the pursuit all the way to the end. Li Qi instantly understands the man must have driven his horse off a cliff to keep up, and now 2 wreck survivors are facing each other at the river's edge. Even though he can barely move, Li Qi refuses to surrender and forces himself halfway upright with the saber pointed at the soldier. His murderous stare actually stops the soldier for a moment, because Li Qi looks less like a defeated man and more like a beast waiting to bite before it dies. But revenge wins out, and the soldier curses Li Qi as he drags his broken leg forward for one final attack. With a scream and a burst of unbearable pain, the soldier suddenly charges, catching Li Qi off guard for one fatal instant. Li Qi cannot dodge, so he spends his last strength lifting his saber into the path of the charge and bets everything on trading lives. The soldier's blade punches into Li Qi's body, and at the same time Li Qi's sharper officer's saber drives through the man's armor. Neither can finish the job with their weapons, so they drop the sabers and lunge into a filthy last struggle with hands, teeth, and pure hatred. Li Qi bites off the soldier's ear while the man tears at Li Qi's neck, and the fight sinks into raw survival. Then the soldier is suddenly blasted backward, his face caved in by an unseen horse kick that ends the fight in one shocking instant. As the danger finally breaks, Li Qi sees a horse and a woman rushing toward him, starts to station, and blacks out on the spot. When his awareness returns, it is only a muddy half-conscious drift where he cannot move, focus, or even tell how much time has passed. In that haze, Li Qi feels chains dragging his divine soul downward toward karmic fire, while some unseen protection barely keeps him from falling. He knows that protection will not last, so with his remaining mind he desperately searches for any kind of Qi he can still use to wake himself up. Then he remembers wave-breaking force, the first method he ever trained, and realizes it should have its own Qi path even if he never noticed it before. Still trapped between life and death, he forces his body to follow that method and hunts for the hidden movement of Ing Qi, Wei Qi, and Blood Qi inside himself. It works, and as the 3 treasures stir inside him, cracks spread across the frosted haze sealing off his mind. Li Qi seizes that tiny bit of gathered power, slams it into himself, and violently tears his consciousness back to the surface. When he finally wakes for real, Li Qi finds Shinshubi lying warm on top of him, and only then notices one very awkward detail: she is also extremely soft. Lychee jolts awake to the last of his strength draining out, and Shinshubi is clutching him in panic because the underworld Yinshi almost pulled him to his death. As Shinshubi hurriedly fixes her torn dress, Lychee realizes her immaculate body blocked the underworld Yinshi long enough for him to survive. When he forces himself upright, Lychee finally sees the aftermath. They are camped in a forest clearing, his chest is badly wrapped, and Shinshubi must have ripped her own dress apart to save him. Lychee also realizes just how close he came to dying, because without Shinshubi's rescue and Old Horse keeping pace before that, he would have fallen for real. Shinshubi brings over the pot she was tending and starts feeding him herself, barehanded and completely unfazed by the boiling heat. While feeding him, Shinshubi bluntly praises him for killing a 9th-rank military path cultivator even though he is still unranked. Lychee refuses to act proud and explains he only won because the officer wasted power blocking mountain roots and water veins, never guessing Lychee could not borrow that power anyway. He remembers it was really a desperate trick at the pond, with bad terrain, surprise, and luck barely enough to turn the fight around before he was cut open. Shinshubi brushes off the excuses and says a win is still a win, because that is what the lady always taught her. The rough rice cake porridge is packed with mushrooms, cured meat, salt, and wild greens, and the smell hits Lychee so hard that hunger overwhelms the pain. Too weak to use his hands, Lychee lets Shinshubi feed him mouthful after mouthful, while blood still seeps from his chest and every movement hurts. Shinshubi tells him she cooked every bit of meat from his pack because his body is trying to recover from forcing out a trace of internal chi. That phrase stops Lychee cold, because he did it instinctively to survive and has no idea what actually happened inside his body. Shinshubi explains that martial Dao fighters do not draw outside chi like shamans do, because they treat the human body itself as the strongest little world. Instead, martial Dao cultivators eat spirit beasts, strange chi, and even people, then digest all of it into one unified internal chi for combat. She adds that different ways of eating create different branches, and martial Dao is especially strong at direct combat and strange fighting techniques. When she casually asks if he already has a martial Dao method, Lychee looks inward and starts wondering if wave-breaking force was one all along. Shinshubi immediately reads his face and warns him not to treat this like some rare lucky inheritance, because old Taoist powers once tried to spread cultivation to everyone under heaven. She explains that many Taoist orthodoxies once joined a plan called widespread throughout the world, hoping everyone could hear the Tao, choose a path, and cultivate. For a time that plan really worked, and Shinshubi proudly says that is why ordinary people everywhere still have scraps of cultivation methods to strengthen themselves and do useful odd tricks. Then her mood drops, because making the Tao too easy to reach led from a century of joy into 1,000 years of disrespect, distortion, and chaos across countless paths. She explains the orthodoxies finally had to agree that the Tao and its techniques could not be passed around lightly, and that is why cultivators gradually withdrew from ordinary life. So when she looks at Lychee's wave-breaking force, Shinshubi is sure it is just one of those old fragments left behind among commoners. She offers to hear the full technique and trace it back to its original source instead of the broken version he learned. Lychee is stunned by both the old history and her confidence, and he asks if wave-breaking force really could come from a proper Tao lineage. Shinshubi answers with complete certainty that almost all methods under heaven come from old inheritances, and Lychee's new internal chi makes her even more sure this fragment is martial Tao. Because Shinshubi is a 5th-rank expert with no reason to covet his rough village technique, Lychee drops any hesitation and recites wave-breaking force to her on the spot. As soon as she hears it, Shinshubi goes completely still, frowning so hard that she even forgets to keep feeding him. Knowing she will forget everything else while thinking, Lychee quietly takes the pot and starts drinking the rest himself. He finishes the entire heavy pot of porridge, and with food in his stomach the weakness finally starts loosening its grip on his body. Lychee realizes that the tiny trace of internal chi is burning itself up to support him, blunting the pain and helping his body resist miasma, poison, heat, and cold. Between that internal chi and a full meal, his strength returns far faster than his injuries should allow, and Lychee feels steady enough to move again. Seeing that morning has arrived, Lychee pushes through the pain and rushes to complete his daily 4-season sacrifices before the chance passes. When the Eastern Azure Dragon answers, Lychee immediately uses the Great Forest Wood Chi, and fresh spring vitality surges through him to start closing the wound. That burst of recovery finally lets Lychee breathe easier, and he lies back down convinced he should be able to recover by tomorrow. Just as he starts to relax, Shinshubi suddenly claps in excitement because the answer has finally clicked in her head. She blurts out that wave-breaking force is really a fragment of carp flowing intent, and Lychee startles so hard he reopens the pain in his chest. Shinshubi proudly explains that carp flowing intent belongs to a small martial Dao sect under Luofu Mountain, and its later stages can even align with Luofu's true intent and enter the Dao Gate. Lychee can barely believe his rough village method is tied to Luofu Mountain at all, but Shinshubi happily offers to teach him the complete version. Lychee thanks her sincerely, and Shinshubi casually brushes it off as just an 8th-rank Jianghu technique before suddenly asking whether he wants to see Old Horse. Then she asks if he wants to see Old Horse, and Li Qi finally notices the animal is nowhere in sight. Shinshobi says Old Horse is too embarrassed to face Li Qi, because the men chasing them were actually after him. Li Qi immediately shrugs it off and tells her to bring Old Horse back, because whatever the trouble was, they still need him if they want to keep traveling. Old Horse is so ashamed after the awkward moment that he quietly chooses to leave on his own. Li Qi immediately gets nervous, because if Old Horse really runs off, he and Shinshobi will have to find Lady Luofu on foot. That makes Shinshobi oddly cheerful, and she stands up and calls toward the trees as if she knows Old Horse will listen. A moment later Old Horse really does come back, still looking too guilty to meet them properly. Li Qi does not make a big deal of it. He pats Old Horse's neck and tells him they are helping each other anyway. Once the mood settles, Li Qi lets Old Horse go graze and turns his attention to the thing he really wants to understand: carp flowing intent. Shinshobi explains that carp flowing intent is a martial Dao method modeled after the carp, but it is crude and only reaches 8th rank at best. Li Qi hears for the first time that cultivation methods themselves are graded, and the idea instantly makes sense to him. As Shinshobi breaks it down, Li Qi realizes crude methods like wave-breaking force can barely force out a trace of internal qi and are basically unranked trash. By contrast, Shinshobi says a true first-rank method like Li Qi's Zhu can guide someone all the way upward because earlier cultivators already paid to clear that road. She adds that low-grade methods are not a life sentence, but anyone trying to break past their limits has to carve that harder road alone. Then Shinshobi lays out what a complete cultivation inheritance should contain: the cultivation method, the classics, the treasury records, and the records of the strange. She says the cultivation method itself is usually short and sharp, because the real path should be clear enough to practice, not buried under nonsense. Using Li Qi's own ritual path as an example, she explains that daily sacrifices through the 4 seasons over a full year are what finally let a beginner truly step into 9th rank. Next she explains the classics. Without them, a cultivator can practice moves but still have no idea what Dao they are actually walking. For her, a real cultivator has to be a seeker of Dao, not just a strong brute who can fight. She goes on to the treasury records, which hold the useful side of cultivation: resources, allies, sect knowledge, spells, and ways to turn cultivation into real methods. Then she describes the records of the strange as the path's encyclopedia, the kind of knowledge you can skip if you want to stay ignorant of the world. To make it concrete, Shinshobi tells Li Qi that his Shu already counts as a complete inheritance with all 4 parts included. She warns him that people who begin cultivating halfway through life or by sheer luck are usually missing pieces of the inheritance, which is why their road becomes much harsher. Her warning gets even sharper when she tells him the Dao must not be passed around carelessly, or both giver and receiver can pay for it with punishment and death. She even brings up an old disaster, when many orthodoxies once tried to spread cultivation to the whole world and ended up triggering a chaotic age instead. Li Qi accepts that logic at once, because opening cultivation to everyone without restraint feels to him like throwing open an armory. The more he thinks about it, the more he agrees that power without the right temperament only breeds disaster. After seeing Li Qi take the warning seriously, Shinshobi softens right back into her cute self and scoots closer to teach him the actual method. She begins with the origin of carp flowing intent, saying the carp is sacred in Taoist tradition and tied to the idea of crossing between realms. She cites old stories of enlightened masters riding red carp into the abyss, showing why carp are linked to spiritual passage and ascension. To prove the myth is not empty, she mentions a terrifying river carp demon powerful enough to freeze an enormous river overnight. But she quickly brings him back down to earth. This 8th rank version is nowhere near that kind of monster-level power. The real core of the method is practical: move like a carp going upstream, stay hidden in water, endure pressure, slip with the current, and store strength for one explosive release. For martial Dao, though, Shinshobi says the most important thing is far less elegant: you have to eat the right qi every single day. In this case, carp flowing intent needs a daily thread of water qi refined into internal qi inside the body. She lists the first crude option: eating lots of fish, because fish flesh naturally carries a little water qi. The second option is better but troublesome: drink spring water right from a mountain source, where water qi is born. The third option would be heavenly treasures or water aspect beasts, but that is so expensive it stops being a real option for Li Qi immediately. Shinshobi points out the good news instead: deep in the 10,000 great mountains, mountain water sources are common, so his daily water qi problem can actually be solved. With the resource problem handled, Shinshobi starts teaching Li Qi the complete practice method on the spot. She explains that martial Dao has no flashy spells here, only the practice method that builds power and the combat method that later teaches how to use it. That is enough for Li Qi to begin a second path of cultivation immediately, alongside his shaman ritual practice. Shinshobi tells him dual cultivation is common enough, but only if you keep a clear main method and avoid letting different qis throw the body out of balance. She also warns that most people do not have the energy to deeply master 2 orthodoxies at once, because one Dao alone can consume a whole lifetime. Li Qi is not worried, because his level is still so basic that taking on a second subject feels more like an elementary student adding one more lesson. 2 days pass, and with the help of Great Forest Wood Qi, Li Qi's body recovers far faster than normal. After recovering, he deliberately slows the journey down and starts traveling only half a day so the other half can go into cultivation. Now every day he searches the mountains for a water source, because without one he cannot feed carp flowing intent at all. Whenever he finds a spring, Li Qi stops, soaks himself in the water, drinks until he is full, and begins refining the water chi through movement. His punches and kicks are no longer random drills but part of the method, driving the body's little heaven and earth to absorb and digest water chi. Because he already has a foundation from wave-breaking force, Li Qi picks up carp flowing intent much faster than expected. That speed makes him realize something almost absurd. The rough gang technique he grew up with was only a broken fragment of a sect method others would fight to steal. He cannot help feeling the gap in worlds, because a fragment once supported the livelihood of hundreds, yet Shinshobi teaches him the complete thing as casually as if it were nothing. The strangeness of that good fortune only makes Li Qi treasure the present more, because all of this changed in barely half a month. From then on, he throws himself into both paths every day, steadily gathering different kinds of chi instead of wasting the chance. Each morning starts with an early sacrifice to the Eastern Azure Dragon, letting Li Qi draw in another portion of Great Forest Wood Chi. After that, he takes out the peach charm carved with the household god's image and completes his daily ritual priest cultivation. Only then does he spend the morning traveling and the afternoon hunting down a spring to continue carp flowing intent. Li Qi soon discovers that martial Dao practice is much more physically brutal than ritual work, even if the rituals are harder to memorize and easier to mess up. The shaman path punishes one wrong step with failure or rejection, but martial Dao punishes him differently by demanding the same movements again and again until his body is wrung dry. He has to keep starting over until every bit of mixed chi in his body is fully transformed, and a single day's practice can cost him at least 6 hard hours. By the time he finally finishes, Li Qi is usually so tired he can only lie still in the water and breathe. And even that only counts as finishing the practice method, because the actual combat arts of carp flowing intent still wait ahead. So the journey settles into a hard new rhythm, with half a day on the road and half a day in the water, as Li Qi keeps moving forward one exhausting practice at a time. Deep in the jungle at midnight, Li Qi crouched with a knife in hand and fixed his eyes on a rare lone mountain goat. He waited for the perfect opening, knowing one clean throw should cut the goat's throat before it could escape. Li Qi burst forward like a fired arrow and drove the blade into the goat's neck. But the wound did not drop it on the spot, and the half-severed goat exploded into a desperate sprint instead. Li Qi chased hard at first, because if the goat ran too far into the deep mountains, the hunt could turn into a death trap. He knew the difference well. Village roads kept beasts away, but the ancient forest beyond them could hide wolves, tigers, or even demons. Even so, a whole goat was too valuable to lose, enough meat for days and hide and horns worth selling later. When the distance kept widening, Li Qi finally admitted the truth and cursed his own weak blade work. He gave up on catching it by foot, but not on claiming it at all. Li Qi raised a piercing whistle into the night to call his strongest partner. A mighty neigh answered him at once as Old Horse came charging through the mountains like a creature that could almost fly. The goat could leap cliffs, but Old Horse still caught it in a few bounds. Old Horse stomped the goat down, kicked it into the mountain wall, and ended the hunt for good. Afterward, the proud old steed pawed the ground and neighed toward Li Qi as if asking for praise. Li Qi hurried over, slung the goat onto his shoulder, and climbed onto Old Horse to head back to Shinshobi. Old Horse answered warmly and carried him home through the forest with effortless speed, because its injuries had finally healed. 17 days had passed since Li Qi nearly died, and he had used that time to train so hard that he healed his own damage again and again with great forest wood chi just to keep going. With steady access to water chi, his carp flowing intent had reached initial mastery and turned him from a strong laborer into a real martial fighter. Now more than a dozen strands of internal chi could burst through his meridians at once, adding skilled power on top of his raw bull strength heart. After testing himself on boulders, Li Qi knew that with both paths combined and his military saber in hand, he could now face an ordinary 9th-rank wandering cultivator without being crushed. That new strength also changed his daily life, because once his rations ran out, he could finally survive by hunting instead of just hoping not to starve. Prey he could never touch before, like mountain goats and red foxes, had become targets he could now stalk and kill with a single strike. For the first time since entering this world, Li Qi felt like he had truly become someone with real ability. Back at the forest clearing, Shinshobi quietly hummed to herself while sorting furs and bones and casually absorbing the moon's grand chi like a late-night snack. Her easy appetite for moon chi showed how unusual she really was, because ordinary demonkind needed grandine to cultivate, but for her it was barely more than a treat. Shinshobi was no common demon at all, but a spirit beast from Luofu Mountain with an immaculate body that ignored dust, poison, heat, cold, and even ordinary hunger. As she packed, she guessed Li Qi would return soon and happily imagined that they might finally leave for Ishian today. These 17 waiting days had been spent watching Li Qi train and waiting for Old Horse to recover completely, because Li Qi insisted there was no point leaving half-prepared. Now that the horse was ready, Li Qi's plan was simple: reach Ishian, restock, and then race straight toward Lady Luofu. The thought of seeing Lady Luofu again made Shinshobi so happy that she started humming all over again. A moment later, Lichi rode back into camp with the goat across his back and found Shinshobi waiting just as cheerfully as before. To Lichi, Shinshobi was still a contradiction, graceful and ethereal when quiet, but oddly foolish the moment she opened her mouth. Lichi dropped the goat and immediately got to work skinning and butchering it, because meat had replaced the rice cakes they finished days ago. He had only dared start hunting like this after his martial skills improved, because before that he would never risk leaving the safer roads. Even fishing had once been dangerous to him, since any quiet pool in these mountains might hide something far worse than fish. Now he had both stronger martial arts and a fully recovered dragon steed, so even if trouble appeared, he finally believed he could run from it. He also had no real choice anymore, because without hunting, he would simply go hungry. The payoff was obvious. Once he started eating meat and fish every day, his carb-flowing intent improved much faster. He had even saved a pile of hides and bones to sell later, though his attempt to preserve gathered mountain produce ended in quick rot and total failure. Lichi wisely gave up on wild mushrooms too, because in these mountains one bad guess could kill him before he understood what he ate. After cleaning the offal in the river, he split the goat between a boiling iron pot and skewers over the fire so dinner would be ready fast. One goat would only feed him for about 2 days now, because martial cultivation had doubled his appetite. He even tossed Old Horse a piece of meat before the steed happily ran off to graze on the endless mountain grass. While Lichi cooked, Shinshobi came over and asked brightly if they were really leaving after tonight. Lichi confirmed the plan: go to Xian first, sell their haul, buy supplies and clothes, and then ride toward Lady Luofu. But when he casually called finding Lady Luofu incidental, Shinshobi instantly flared up and snapped that it was not incidental at all. Lichi backed off with a quick joke, but he understood exactly why she reacted so strongly. After all, Shinshobi had once crippled her own cultivation just to keep Lady Luofu hidden, so her loyalty was beyond doubt. The camp fell quiet after that, but Lichi's joke had not really been a joke at all. As he looked ahead, Lichi was already worrying about what would happen once they actually found Lady Luofu. He knew the answer was obvious. Once Shinshobi reunited with her lady, she would leave with her, and Lichi would be on his own again. That night, Lichi lies awake turning over one problem after another, especially the strange soldiers he saw earlier. He keeps circling back to that banner with the twisted pine tree, because it looked like Song's standard, not Tang's. From what he knows, Tiny Song was crushed by Tang, so Lichi starts wondering if Tang now controls Song and is pushing deeper into Shaman Dao territory through this region. That makes his mood even heavier, because as a Wushan Mountain ritual priest, he may already be standing on the front line of a dangerous power struggle. In the end, he forces himself to stop guessing, because before anything else, he has to find Lady Luofu and finish the mission Mr. Zhu gave him. Then another thought unsettles him. Shinshobi is already 5th rank, so just how terrifying must Lady Luofu be? When he remembers that Lady Luofu crossed 200,000 or 300,000 li in a single day while wounded and carrying someone, the scale of it feels almost impossible. By the time he finally falls asleep, Lady Luofu has become a monster in his mind, someone who might cross heaven and earth in a single night. Morning comes, Lichi finishes the day's sacrifice, gathers fresh divine qi, and sets off again with Shinshobi. Spring is fully arriving now, with beasts waking, trees budding, and fields starting to stir back to life. The old horse runs so absurdly fast that Lichi barely has time to see the scenery at all. Shinshobi, meanwhile, happily recites old records about local farmland and crops, and Lichi can only wonder why all her knowledge seems to circle back to food. In less than an hour, they reach Yixian, one of Li Prefecture's counties. Seeing how much distance the old horse erased in a flash, Lichi is reminded again that a real mount changes everything. But he does not dare ride a dragon steed straight into a small county city, so he leaves the old horse outside and decides to enter quietly on foot. He also makes Shinshobi keep her head down, because even without the horse, bringing a beauty like her around could still draw trouble. Lichi would rather leave her outside too, but she needs new clothes, and there is no decent way for him to handle that without bringing her along. After paying the small market fee, Lichi takes Shinshobi into Yixian's commercial district to sell off their hunting goods. He lays out hides, bones, leftover goat meat, and mountain produce, because the first priority now is earning enough to outfit them properly. The moment the rare wilderness goods go on display, customers crowd in and business starts almost at once. Lichi handles the bargaining smoothly, showing he came in with his prices ready and intends to make every coin count. By noon, the meat, furs, and mountain produce are gone, and only the harder-to-sell bones are left. After counting more than 6,000 yen, Lichi decides to stop waiting and go buy clothes even if the bones stay unsold. Shinshobi is plainly miserable in the crowded market, so the moment he says they are leaving, she quickly helps him pack up. Right then, a plump wealthy man steps in and asks if all the remaining bones and shells are Lichi's to sell. Lichi instantly slips back into sales mode, praising the quality of the bones and trying to close the deal before the man changes his mind. To Lichi's surprise, the man agrees at once to buy everything for 1,000 yen. The man's appearance is almost funny, because he looks less like a customer and more like a living god of wealth from a festive door painting. But the sale comes with a catch. he says he is too frail to carry the load, so Li Qi must deliver it to his house on the west side before getting paid. Since the mansion is on the way to the tailor shops anyway, Li Qi agrees and follows him west with the bones on his back. On the way, the man notices Shinshubi, and Li Qi quickly claims she is his little sister to keep things simple. The man laughs because they look nothing alike, with Li Qi darkened by hard labor while Shinshubi looks like a sheltered girl from a good family. Li Qi keeps the lie going, saying he had fair skin once too, but he would never let his little sister work out in the sun. That answer seems to strike a chord, and the man admits he feels the same way about his own younger sister. Shinshubi follows exactly as instructed, head down and silent, perfectly happy to let Li Qi handle every awkward word. The west side of Yixian finally gives way to a large mansion that clearly matches the man's wealth. Then the place starts feeling wrong, because there are no servants in sight and even the stone lions at the gate are furred with moss. There is still cooking smoke inside, so someone is living here, and that only makes Li Qi more wary. The wealthy man casually explains that his family keeps no servants, then pushes open the door himself. A cold gust blows straight through the doorway, and the chill immediately puts Li Qi on edge. Inside the courtyard, an old blind woman is sitting alone in the cold. The wealthy man hurries to her side and gently calls her mother, sounding sincerely concerned that she is sitting out here instead of warming herself inside. Without any fuss, he pays Li Qi with a small piece of gold worth roughly the promised 1,000 chien and tells him to leave the bones there. The blind old woman never reacts at all, and that silent stillness makes the whole mansion feel even stranger. Li Qi checks the gold, decides the amount is right, and chooses not to poke into whatever is wrong with this household. So he shoulders his basket, takes Shinshubi, and walks out of the eerie mansion without looking back. Only after they are outside does Shinshubi quietly say something stranger. The person she noticed in that mansion seemed to be a diviner. When Shinshubi calls the blind old woman a little girl, Li Qi finally realizes she means the diviner they just met. Shinshubi explains that a real diviner reads fortune from turtleshell omens, so a house this heavy with Yin-Chi should never belong to one. She warns that the old woman may have wanted Li Qi's turtle shell from the start, and could be trying to shift some looming disaster onto him. Li Qi remembers the blame-shifting rites from the Zhu and immediately checks the one suspicious thing he received from her, the tiny piece of gold. Shinshubi admits she cannot prove it, and is only going by instinct, but Li Qi trusts her sense enough to take the gold seriously. He refuses to dump the risk on a stranger, but he also refuses to ignore it, so he starts thinking through a way to deal with the gold himself. Before acting, Li Qi decides they need proper clothes, both for travel and for the kind of serious rituals and people he expects to face later. After a painful round of spending, Li Qi buys them both a smart cotton outfit faced with silk, expensive enough to look respectable even at a banquet. He also buys a cheaper set of ordinary commoner clothes for daily wear, because his old mountain linen is already too ragged to pass in town. Li Qi changes into the plain city clothes and packs away the expensive outfit, determined to save the good set for important occasions. Shinshubi, on the other hand, puts on the silk outfit right away, because her immaculate body keeps even fine clothes perfectly clean. Li Qi can only marvel that Shinshubi looks like someone who could stay in the mountains for 100 years and still never seem touched by ordinary life. The tailor blurts out that she is astonishingly beautiful, and Li Qi immediately realizes this attention is going to be trouble. Li Qi instantly knows this is bad and drags the delighted Shinshubi out before even trying to bargain. Out on the street, Shinshubi beams like a child with a new toy while Li Qi feels every staring gaze land on him instead. Even so, Li Qi cannot bring himself to make her hide that happiness, so his pride wins out, and he chooses to protect her openly instead. They leave the city before nightfall and head back into the wild edge of the 10,000 Great Mountains, where fewer human eyes can follow them. Li Qi whistles for the old horse, but the sharp call is agony for Shinshubi's rabbit-keen hearing. An answering neigh rings out, and the old horse races through the forest to Li Qi like an eager companion. Li Qi tells Shinshubi and the old horse to wait here while he goes back to the city to deal with the gold. When Li Qi asks what the horse wants to eat, Shinshubi casually translates his demand for oats with beets like this is perfectly normal. Before leaving, Li Qi cuts another lock of the old horse's mane for ritual use, earning an annoyed shake of the head. Shinshubi simply agrees to wait, and Li Qi is struck again by how calmly she bears the loss of 1,000 years of cultivation. After handing Shinshubi the luggage for safekeeping, Li Qi heads back alone, now fixed on solving the danger in the cleanest way he can. On the way, Li Qi settles on his answer. If the gold carries misfortune, he will spend it on a proper sacrifice instead of passing it to another person. He settles on the Li River's Qinghua Palace deity, the river god he knows best from joining that grand ceremony year after year. Back in the city, Li Qi hires laborers and starts directing them like a real ritual priest as a small sacrificial ground takes shape beside the river. The cost hurts, but Li Qi pushes through because this is also his first chance to run a sacrifice involving several people instead of standing alone. As the setup nears completion, Li Qi cannot help thinking how tiny his ritual is compared to the massive river opening ceremony run by the prefect each year. When everything is ready, Li Qi steps forward and begins the offering with meat, spices, paper boats, old horse mane, and the cursed-looking gold placed right in the middle. Li Qi sends the offerings onto the Li River and coldly decides that if this thing really carries disaster, it can try taking that up with the river god instead of him. By the Li River, Lychee sets up a private sacrifice to the water god, aiming not at blind worship but at a real exchange for fresh water chi. He keeps his focus as hired drummers pound the fish skin drums and the chanting starts, turning the riverbank into a proper ritual scene. One by one, Lychee sends the paper boats into the water with meat, gold, dragon steed mane, wine, and finally a lit white candle to guide the way. That last candle hurts to part with because it is absurdly expensive, but Lychee forces himself to stay calm and finish the rite properly. When the ritual finally reaches completion, Lychee drinks the priest's wine and shifts from offering to negotiation, using the methods he learned from the Zhu book. He reminds himself what a ritual priest really is, not a servant of gods, but a broker who trades sacrifices for what humans need. As he stares at the boats after the second cup, a small whirlpool opens in the river and begins swallowing every offering. The crowd reacts like a crowd, with some mocking him for tossing gold into the river and others jumping in to try stealing it back. Lychee ignores the chaos, drains the third cup, and waits for the ritual's real answer. At the 3 heavy drumbeats, the water chi inside his body suddenly stirs and links him to the river through his carp-flowing intent. Following that pull without hesitation, Lychee steps forward and dives straight into the river. The moment he enters, the ordinary river vanishes and Lychee finds himself in a sealed water world that feels completely cut off from heaven and earth. Before him rises a breathtaking realm of jeweled palaces, coral, crystal towers, and layered pavilions stretching up through the water like an immortal kingdom. Remembering Shinshubi's talk of Luofu Mountain's grotto heavens, Lychee realizes this impossible place may be the Qinghua Palace named in the old invocation. He barely has time to take it in before a shooting star drops from above and slams into him without warning. Dazed by the blow, Lychee instinctively swims upward and bursts back out into the real Li River. The vision was no illusion, because 30 strands of pure water chi are now circulating inside him, and the sacrifice has clearly succeeded. Back on shore, Lychee is in high spirits, and even if that suspicious gold causes trouble now, he is no longer afraid after seeing the scale of the Li River god. The glimpse of Qinghua Palace also leaves him feeling tiny, because even an unimportant river god of a petty state can be this immense, and the greater mountains beyond are hard to imagine. Instead of being discouraged, Lychee gets even more fired up, wanting one day to stand high enough to truly look over the myriad paths. He pays off the temporary workers, packs the drum and whatever can still be used, and decides to buy food before leaving the city that same afternoon. He also plans to ask Shinshubi how to use these new strands of water chi, since she understands cultivation far better than he does. But before he can reach the market, Lychee spots the wealthy householder from earlier, and immediately tries to avoid him. The householder rushes over anyway, grabs him, and blurts out that he remembers buying Lychee's beast bones that morning. Lychee coldly points out that their trade was already finished cleanly, so there is no reason for this man to be clinging to him now. The wealthy man instantly changes his tune, calling Lychee a great shaman and begging him not to hold the earlier offense against him. When Lychee slips free with the ease of carp-flowing intent, the man gets even more convinced he has found a real expert. Then the householder throws himself at Lychee again, kneels in the street, and offers 20 gold coins if Lychee will save his life. Lychee hates the attention and angrily drags him up, warning that if he just walks away, no one will save the man at all. The offer of 20 gold is enough to make Lychee stop and think, even though he still finds the man deeply unpleasant. In the end, Lychee tells him to talk at home instead, and the two quickly leave the public street for the householder's mansion. Back inside the mansion, the same eerie atmosphere presses in again as the householder eagerly starts trying to explain himself. Lychee cuts him off at once and insists on the safer title Masterly, keeping his identity limited to a wandering practitioner instead of revealing himself as a Wushan ritual priest. The householder immediately guesses Lychee saw the problem with the gold, hoping that means he really came back to help. Lychee turns stern and calls out the real issue. This man knew the gold was dangerous and still pushed it onto him. The householder admits it with shameless fawning, saying he felt forced and only regrets it because Lychee turned out to be far more capable than he expected. That answer kills Lychee's last bit of sympathy, because a man who is both shameless and foolish is exactly the kind of trouble he does not want near him. Just as Lychee is ready to walk away, an old woman's voice comes from behind him, and her calm apology for her foolish son instantly reveals that someone far more perceptive has been listening. Lychee's skin crawls when the blind old woman suddenly appears behind him without a sound, turning a tense visit into something openly dangerous. The old woman calmly admits she ordered her son to intercept Lychee after a divination told her her son's life depended on this matter. She presses the point by asking how her dim-witted son could have known Lychee would be at the river ritual unless she had guided him. Lychee refuses the way she keeps calling him senior brother and tries to shrink the distance, clearly wanting out of this conversation fast. Instead of backing off, the old woman insists the title is proper because Lychee is a true Wushan Mountain disciple and she is only an expelled outer servant who learned scraps. That only makes Lychee angrier, and he fires back that her so-called respect started with a blame-shifting curse used as a warning shot. The old woman flatters him without hesitation, saying the Cheong bull accepted him and the great ritual priest personally passed him the Zhu, so a small misfortune could never truly hurt him. She admits she dared to provoke him only to force this meeting, while her son trembles nearby and can do nothing but wait for Li Qi's reaction. Li Qi cuts her off and says there is nothing to negotiate, but he is already sweating because her divination means his trail may be easier to expose than he thought. Just as he tries to walk away, the old woman stops him with the real hook. She says she cannot actually divine his location at all. That makes Li Qi stop cold, because if she really could not trace him directly, then something else around him must have exposed him. Li Qi turns back fully and demands an explanation, now ready to fight if she tries anything. He quietly readies everything at once, building power through carp flowing intent, preparing bull strength art, and watching his floating progress bars for the first hint of an attack. The old woman stays calm and asks a strange question instead. Does Li Qi know where the horse beside him really came from? Without waiting for an answer, she reveals the old horse's true name, Dragon Steed Shadow Trace, once the prized mount of Song General Lu Bosi. She paints the horse as a legendary beast, towering over ordinary mounts, and once able to ride clouds, cross water, and carry the promise of becoming a dragon. Then she explains how Song fell apart under Tang pressure, and even a 7th-rank general like Lu Bosi was destroyed by Tang's Taoist arts before dying in despair. After Lu Bosi's death, the Tang side seized the dragon steed, but the horse refused to serve its master's killers and fought so hard they had to try sealing its bloodline. That seal was only half finished before Shadow Trace escaped, which turned the horse from a prize into a major pursuit target. The old woman says news of the escape spread across half of Great Lu, and diviners like her were specifically tasked with searching for clues about the missing dragon steed. She finally lays out how she cornered him. Once she saw Li Qi in person, the horse and the 9th-rank Tang saber on him were enough clues to guess the whole situation. Li Qi keeps a straight face, but inside he is rattled because the old horse's background is far bigger and more dangerous than he ever guessed. He realizes the horse's current strength is only half of what it should be, because half its bloodline essence is still sealed away. Even so, Li Qi says nothing and keeps watching her, forcing the old woman to show the rest of her hand first. The old woman bluntly says she knows her whole family's lives are now in Li Qi's hands, and that is exactly why she wants to negotiate. She admits Li Qi's own trail is hard to divine, and says Shinshubi is even more terrifying because the old woman could not sense her presence at all. She guesses Shinshubi may have reached the leakless realm, making it even clearer that Li Qi's side is strong but not specialized in divination. Then she makes the practical argument. Others can still follow the dragon steed's clues, so keeping the horse invites disaster, and throwing it away wastes a treasure worth 1,000 gold. Her offer is serious and grim. She will spend the rest of her life performing a ritual to follow the dragon steed's karmic traces so Li Qi will not be hunted through it later. In return, she asks for one thing only: Li Qi must save her son's life. Li Qi stays outwardly calm, but inside he starts breaking the problem apart piece by piece to see whether this bargain is a trap or his best option. He first puts the horse's story together in plain terms. The old horse is Shadow Trace, a prized escaped mount that a Tang general still wants back badly enough to hire diviners. Because Li Qi has been asking Shinshubi about armies, he can now judge what that title means, and general is already the commander of at least 10,000 troops. That makes the threat feel much worse, because if a Song general reached 7th rank, a Tang general chasing this horse may be even stronger. Li Qi measures that danger against himself and knows the gap is real. He can smash stone and kill groups of men, but he still does not count as ranked at all. He remembers killing a 9th-rank enemy only because everything favored him at once, including an ambush, water terrain, and Shinshubi saving his life afterward. So if this hunter above him is really 6th rank, Li Qi knows he is dealing with someone on a completely different level. His thoughts jump to the kind of power that can split a river with one sword, and being targeted by someone in that class sounds like pure disaster. Even with all that pressure, Li Qi still refuses to trust the blind old woman, because anyone who opens talks by throwing a curse is not safe to rely on. He also decides she must still be hiding information, because what she claims to have inferred should not have been enough by itself. Still, Li Qi sees one useful truth in the mess: a dangerous liar he can overpower is easier to handle than the Tang general behind the hunt. Once he makes up his mind, Li Qi tests her by refusing the offer and saying he can always find another diviner. The old woman answers immediately that cleanly severing karmic clues would require a 7th-rank diviner, which is not someone Li Qi can casually hire. Li Qi admits her logic makes sense, but he tells her plainly that what she did earlier destroyed any easy trust between them. So the old woman offers a show of sincerity first: bring out the Tang saber, and she will remove its karmic traces before asking him to hear the real problem. Li Qi accepts the general idea, because at this point seeing her methods up close is better than guessing. But he changes the order on purpose and asks her to explain what she wants solved before any ritual starts, so both sides have to show sincerity at the same time. The blind old woman accepts that condition at once, while she and her bewildered son both bow in thanks for the chance to be heard. With the bargain tentatively set, the old woman begins her explanation and says the story starts half a year ago. She quickly adds that the roots actually go back 30 years, long before the current disaster reached her son. The son turns out to be Wang, a local landowner near Yixian from a family that was comfortable and respectable, but not remotely rich enough to explain this mansion. Li Qi quietly compares the numbers in his head and realizes the family's normal income was decent, but nowhere near enough to buy and fill a 3-courtyard estate like this. The old woman finally points to the real turning point. The Wang family's daughter was noticed by a diviner and taken to Wushan Mountain. She trained there for decades but never entered the ranks, so in the end she could only pack up and return home. As she says this, the old woman looks at Li Qi with open envy, because his rise has been absurdly smooth compared with people who spend a lifetime stuck below the threshold. That glance makes Li Qi wonder if his own talent is far more outrageous than he realized, since rituals seem to answer him almost every time. Still, he keeps that question to himself and listens as the old woman explains what happened after the Wang daughter came back. Even without entering the ranks, the Wang daughter brought back real divination methods, and she used those predictions to steer the family toward fortune. That is how the Wang family's money truly took off, turning an ordinary landowning household into the wealthy family now sitting in this eerie mansion. As old lady Wang tells her story, Li Qi realizes how brutally easy money becomes once someone can actually cultivate. The old woman explains that one divination could reveal profitable business, harvest luck, and even when it was safe to leave the house, so building a fortune became almost unfairly simple. After returning from Wushan Mountain still looking far younger than her age, she married, had a son, and helped turn the Wang family from small landlords into one of Yixian's rich households. She says her life already seemed complete, with wealth, comfort, and a filial son, until one final desire ruined everything. What she still wanted was a perfect burial site, one that would protect her descendants and secure her own afterlife. She chose what looked like an excellent geomantic spot, and her son personally took servants there to build her tomb. Then the first strike of the hoe exposed the tomb chamber that was already there. Li Qi goes cold and blurts out the obvious horror. They accidentally dug into someone else's grave in a world full of ghosts and monsters. Old lady Wang admits she was blinded by the site's good feng shui and forgot that truly perfect places are usually already claimed. Worse, her son still entered the cavity, and the tomb-guarding beast answered by spewing miasma that corrupted the family's qi and cut his lifespan short. To prove it, she pulls back Master Wang's clothing and shows Li Qi the streaks of death qi still crawling through his body. Li Qi is startled enough to ask if the tomb owner is somehow still in there. Old lady Wang says the tomb owner may have been an 8th-rank expert whose body died but whose spirit still wanders the tomb in a half-lost, confused state. She even entered the tomb herself and ruined her own eyes while trying to beg forgiveness, but she still failed to lift the curse. Now their family's qi is severed, the servants are gone, the fortune has collapsed, and her son may not survive 3 more years. Through tears, she begs Li Qi to save her son because he is the last hope of the Wang family line. She steadies herself and offers Li Qi the family's last 20 gold, along with a promise to spend the rest of her life muddying the karmic traces on Dragon's Steed Shadow Trace, so helping them will ease his own danger too. After thinking it through, Li Qi decides the Wang family did not mean to offend the dead, so he agrees to try. He immediately asks for paper and brush so he can list the ritual supplies he needs. With the household reduced to almost nothing, Master Wang can only dig out a wooden board and charcoal pencils instead of proper ink and brush. Li Qi accepts the makeshift tools and quickly writes out a sacrificial shopping list. He tells them to prepare the items and promises to return tomorrow to deal with the tomb. After leaving the Wang residence, Li Qi buys his own supplies and heads back out into the wilderness. He whistles for his companions, and soon Shinshubi and the old horse arrive. Li Qi first takes care of the old horse, pouring out oats and beets, and even warning it not to overeat one thing and get sick. Once that is settled, Li Qi asks Shinshubi how to use his 30 strands of pure water qi to improve carp flowing intent. Shinshubi is surprised by the amount of refined water qi and asks where he got it. Li Qi explains how he used the suspicious piece of gold in a sacrifice, and Shinshubi bursts into delighted praise at how cleverly he turned it around. After the praise fades, Shinshubi drops into serious thought while Li Qi waits quietly for her answer. Then she looks up with a solution and asks the question that jolts Li Qi on the spot. Does he want to enter the 9th rank of the martial Dao? Shinshubi starts explaining that Li Qi's liver qi is already strong because he keeps using great forest wood qi, which makes his life force unusually vigorous. She warns that too much life force can become its own problem later, but right now that imbalance can actually be turned to his advantage. Her real plan is to use his wood qi as a guide and fuse the new water qi into his kidney and lung systems, strengthening 3 organs at once. Shinshubi says that if this works, Li Qi's body and internal qi will jump enough for his martial arts to step straight into 9th rank. Li Qi only understands about half of what she is saying, but he trusts her completely and asks what he needs to do. Shinshubi tells him to do nothing except sit down, because she will handle the rest herself. 2 hours later, Li Qi can only stare at his own hands as he feels his internal qi has changed from thin strands into flowing streams. He can barely believe it, because Shinshubi seems to have pushed him into 9th rank just like that. To test it, Li Qi throws a punch with carp flowing intent and feels kidney, liver, and lung qi surge together into one explosive strike. The strike hits with thunder-like force and snaps a tree as thick as a man's embrace clean across the waist, while Li Qi's hand stays unharmed and the only cost is a hard-pounding heartbeat. Shinshubi calmly notes that he is still only a flawed 9th rank for now, because she has strengthened 3 organs instead of all 5. She already has the next steps planned too. In summer he should switch his seasonal sacrifice to Vermilion Bird and use Fire Chi to complete the heart. After that, she says the last missing piece is the spleen, which can be finished through exercise until he naturally becomes a complete 9th rank. Li Qi just goes blank, thinking of how old Lady Wang cultivated for decades without ever entering the ranks while Shinshubi pushed him to 9th rank almost casually. The moment drives home just how terrifying a true 5th rank expert's knowledge is, and how much easier cultivation becomes under the right teacher. As Li Qi steadies his breathing, he starts testing the new reality of his body and realizes his organs, stamina, and poison resistance have all improved dramatically. By the end, he is still standing there speechless, because the threshold of 9th rank has been crossed far too simply for his mind to catch up. When Li Qi mutters about finally reaching 9th rank, Shinshubi casually asks whether 9th rank even has a threshold, and her offhand confidence completely shuts him up. Li Qi drops the argument and gives Shinshubi a sincere bow, because he knows a 5th rank expert just solved a breakthrough that he never could have managed alone. As Li Qi thinks it through, his gratitude hardens into a promise to help Shinshubi find Lady Luofu and repay this favor properly. Used to Li Qi's endless questions by now, Shinshubi simply leans in and asks what else is bothering him. Li Qi carefully recounts the whole gold piece incident, including old Lady Wang, the strange agreement, and everything that happened after he handled the cursed item. After hearing it all, Shinshubi says the logic sounds fine and gets more interested in one side detail: old horse's buried past. Li Qi gently explains that old horse lost his country and former master, so there is no reason to reopen that pain when the old horse barely understands it like an adult would. Shinshubi accepts Li Qi's judgment immediately, and Li Qi decides he will handle the Wang family trouble himself without dragging old horse into it. Li Qi asks the real question next: if he runs into that ghost, how is he supposed to face it or speak to it? Shinshubi looks baffled and reminds him that he carries the divine chi of Shintu and Yulei, wears a ghost-fighting willow branch, and is a ritual priest himself, so the ghost should fear him instead. That straightforward answer finally settles Li Qi, and he goes back to his routine of practicing first and studying after. The next day, Li Qi leaves Shinshubi and old horse waiting in the forest and heads into the city alone with his saber disguised as a walking stick. Before going near the Wang mansion, Li Qi stops at a street stall and buys a simple copper wire hairpin for a woman. Using the purchase as cover, Li Qi casually asks the stall owner why such a rich house has a front gate so empty and neglected. The vendor eagerly spills that the Wang family has been drowning in bad luck for the past year, from robbed goods to a crushing breach penalty in the provincial capital. The vendor adds that even the servants kept getting hurt so badly that the Wang family had to spend a fortune on treatment, and finally dismissed them. Then the vendor smugly calls the Wangs unrighteous rich people, only to admit a moment later that old Lady Wang is kind, Master Wang seems honest, and they even give out porridge every year. Li Qi keeps digging anyway, circling the neighborhood and finding the same story repeated by other nearby people. After confirming the rumors, Li Qi goes to the Wang family's main gate and knocks. The door opens at once because old Lady Wang and Master Wang were already waiting just behind it for him. Old Lady Wang politely invites Li Qi to eat before they head to the tomb, and he agrees without fuss. What old Lady Wang calls a few small dishes turns out to be a surprisingly generous breakfast laid out in the dim mansion. Li Qi sits down and eats, while the mother and son say they have already eaten and simply watch him finish. After breakfast, Li Qi heads out with Master Wang alone, and the nervous merchant keeps sneaking frightened looks at the young expert, while carrying the ritual items ahead of him. Li Qi breaks the silence by addressing Master Wang, and the man jolts like he has been caught doing something wrong. Seeing how badly he is sweating, Li Qi reaches out to take the heavy basket from him despite Master Wang's panicked attempt to refuse. Li Qi carries the load like it is nothing, which only makes Master Wang more certain he is dealing with a real expert. Li Qi uses the walk to ask what the tomb site is supposed to be like, and Master Wang recites his mother's geomantic praise for the place word for word. That answer makes Li Qi frown, because a tomb with such good geomancy should have dissolved resentment and sent the dead on to reincarnation long ago. Li Qi lays out the problem plainly: unless the dead held monstrous resentment, or some trick is hidden in the tomb, this haunting should not still exist. Master Wang can only admit he is an ordinary mortal and has no answers, so Li Qi has to rely on his own judgment. Li Qi silently checks his preparations instead: the willow branch at his waist, the saber in his hand, and the long breath his tempered lungs can now sustain. Remembering Shinshubi's blunt reassurance from last night, Li Qi steadies himself and decides he really is ready to face a ghost. The two leave the fields behind and enter the mountain region, where the Wang tomb sits in the middle of Baiyue's endless rugged terrain. At first the mountain looks ordinary, but on closer inspection Li Qi can see that its shape gathers and its waters return in exactly the way a geomancer would want. When Li Qi looks with Qi sense instead of ordinary sight, the place becomes unmistakable: rich earth, thriving growth, converging mountain roots, and water veins all piling life Qi into one point. Master Wang repeats that his mother chose this place because its 5 elements alignment should bring official fortune and lasting prosperity, which only makes the haunting feel more wrong. Li Qi tells Master Wang to get far back before anything starts, and the terrified merchant does not need to be told twice. Left alone at the site, Lychee begins setting up the altar the way a ritual priest should before dealing with a ghost. As Lychee keeps building the altar, an old ritual saying comes back to him. The Yu people revere ghosts so deeply that their sacrifices often really bring ghosts forth. That leads Lychee back to the core doctrine he learned as a ritual priest. A ghost is not the dead person returned, but a strange gathering of chi that only looks like them. He follows the thought to its grim end and reminds himself that once someone dies, whatever lingers after is only a remnant ash of essence and memory, not the original person anymore. After studying the Zhu book and pressing Shinshubi for answers, Lychee finally understands why most dead souls turn muddled. Once the body decays and the 5 organs fail, the chi that supports awareness has nowhere to stay. That gives him a crucial rule for dealing with ghosts. Ordinary ghosts are just drifting chi and cannot really hurt people, but a vicious ghost can kill if it still controls real things tied to the 5 elements. From that, Lychee judges the enemy at the Wang family tomb is not a weak wandering spirit at all. If it can curse and injure people, its corpse must still be relatively intact. So he changes his approach. This ritual must be performed with the method for sacrificing to a dead person, because to a ritualist, a dead person and a ghost are not the same thing. He quietly recites the rites rules, checking one last danger first. Sacrifices made on inauspicious days like blood taboo or moon killing can bring disaster instead of peace. Once he confirms the timing is safe, Lychee commits to the feasting rite, a full-cooked food ceremony meant to treat the dead with the same courtesy shown to the living. The Wang family had already prepared everything Lychee asked for, so now all that remains is the dangerous part, the invitation itself. Standing beside the altar, Lychee begins the invocation and respectfully calls the spirit from the outskirts, asking it to forgive the offense and come accept the meal. Then comes the part that makes his nerves tighten. If the true master heard him, it should now answer the summons and enter. Even under broad daylight and spring warmth, Lychee suddenly feels a real chill. In the middle of all that living energy, a dark pressure starts gathering. The spirit answers in a way no one can mistake. The wine in Lychee's juice spins up into the air as a thin thread and vanishes into an invisible mouth. A moment later, unseen chopsticks start moving over the offerings. Through chi perception, Lychee finally senses what is here, a chaotic, round, formless thing. Lychee is shaken, but he does not stop. Since the spirit has accepted the invitation, he has to keep the rite perfectly intact. As he offers the chopped meat and sauce according to the rite, a whisper brushes his ear and praises the taste. The air turns even colder. He does not answer the whisper and keeps the rite moving, sliding the bowls into place and offering broth, lung, and spine exactly as required so the contact does not break. Farther back, Wan Yuanwei follows Lychee's orders and keeps kowtowing to the invisible guest, even though terror has almost broken him already. Lychee now understands what the rite has formed. The one eating is the sure not simply the dead person, but a temporary master created from the ghost, the ritual, and the ritualist working together. If the sacrifice finishes cleanly, that means the channel is open and real communication will follow. Until then, Lychee can only stay exact and endure the pressure. Wan Yuanwei sees the daylight feast being eaten by something he cannot even see, and the horror nearly destroys him. The air is colder, and even the nearby plants start to droop. He is so scared he is on the verge of collapsing or wetting himself, but Lychee warned him that ruining the rite now would mean death, so he locks his legs and stays put. Lychee keeps the ceremony going for a long stretch, pushing through every complex step until the feast finally reaches its last sequence. At the end, the invisible shur rises and drains the final ju of wine in one swallow. Lychee knows the rite has reached the most dangerous closing step. Lychee walks solemnly toward Wan Yuanwei and tells him the ritual is complete, and now the host must escort the shur away. That is too much for Wan Yuanwei. Watching Lychee apparently guide the unseen thing straight toward him, he finally loses control and urinates in terror. When the man freezes instead of bowing, Lychee snaps into action and blasts a sharp burst of inner chi into his face like a slap to wake him up. Startled back to his senses, Wan Yuanwei drops down and gives the required 2 bows to the shur, barely managing to do his part before everything falls apart. After accepting the host's bows, the shur returns the formality to Lychee and produces half a cup of wine from nowhere. This is the invitation he has been waiting for. Lychee accepts without hesitation and drinks the returned wine in one gulp, formally agreeing to the communication. The moment the wine goes down, Lychee's vision turns black and his spirit soul is yanked away. The real purpose of the sacrifice has finally begun. Lychee understands what is happening now. The completed rite created a stable channel, and by drinking the shur's wine, he accepted direct contact with the ghost. This is the ritualist's most famous power. Sacrifice is not just worship, but a carefully built medium for speaking with gods, earth spirits, and human ghosts. When light returns, Lychee finds himself in a strange black space lit only by the candles from the altar. Right in front of him floats the same chaotic, formless mass of chi. Lychee suddenly finds himself in a ritual space that feels completely wrong, a boundless fog where direction, light, and even the usual rules of the world seem to have fallen apart. Before he does anything else, Lychee checks himself and realizes his normal clothes are gone. His cloth-wrapped saber did not come in, but the willow branch at his waist survived the crossing. That one surviving ritual tool steadies him, and clutching the willow branch, Lychee gathers his nerve and walks toward the ghost waiting in the dark. Using the altar's ritual link, Lychee formally opens the conversation and asks the ghost for his name. The ghost answers with unsettling clarity, calling himself Elderly and proving he is no muddled wandering spirit. Lychee tries a light joke about sharing the same surname to soften the mood, but Elderly ignores it completely. Instead, Elderly gets straight to the point and asks whether this Wushan Mountain ritual priest has come to make him forgive the grave-digging youth who disturbed his tomb. Lychee calmly denies that and says he came to help, not to force a cheap apology. He explains that Elderly can stay lucid only because this tomb sits on rare blessed land, and that the real source of his fury is the broken geomantic pattern that was keeping him going. Then Lychee lays out his offer. He can have fine wood carved into a replacement body, and use great forest wood chi to repair Elderly's missing defect. The green chi's vitality makes the offer feel real, because Lychee is not bluffing about the ritual method at all. Elderly does not reject the repair, but he immediately pushes the price higher and asks if the gravediggers can really walk away after desecrating his tomb. Lychee does not retreat, and he asks what Elderly actually wants instead. Elderly finally shows his real intent. He wants the grave-digging youth and their whole family killed in a blood sacrifice and buried with him. Lychee frowns at the demand, then deliberately smiles, because he is about to answer as a real ritual priest instead of a frightened negotiator. He starts reciting orthodox Wushan Mountain doctrine, listing the sacred vessels and the 9 forms of sacrifice to make one point clear: blood sacrifice is not among them. That answer freezes the room, and even the ghost goes still when Lychee openly rejects the idea on doctrinal grounds. After the pause, Elderly answers coldly that Lychee is inexperienced, and he quotes shamanic teaching about blood and organs carrying flourishing life chi as if that proves blood sacrifice is valid. That quote rattles Lychee, because it proves this ghost knows real sacrificial lore and may be far more dangerous than he first hoped. Even so, Lychee immediately counters that life chi is for the living, while a dead spirit should be repaid with grain, wine, and clear water that nourish instead. He turns that argument into a new offer, adding a proper repaying sacrifice on top of the wooden body so Elderly can recover without any killing. Elderly drops the polite debate and bluntly warns that Lychee is weaker than him, asking whether he really wants to become his enemy over a few gravediggers. Lychee's expression hardens, and he fires back that a ritual priest exists to reconcile humans with gods and ghosts, not answer every grudge with slaughter. And as he says it, Lychee quietly hints that a 5th-rank expert once taught him this, trying to make the ghost think twice before pushing him any further.